Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. Welcome to episode 27.
I got nothing. We can move right past 27. I have no love for this number.
All right. Well, last time we celebrated our 1-year anniversary of the podcast, and you said something, I think for the second time I've heard you say it on the podcast, and I don't remember you saying this before. You said, I'm terrible at every game I've ever played. And I wanted you to expound upon that a bit because you're pretty good at a lot of games. What do you mean by that?
Well, Ben, this is the Bad at Magic podcast. This isn't the decently average at Magic podcast.
Very true.
So I say that because there are a lot of games that I play. I've played a ton of games, just a ton of different games, and I'm not great at most of them. So it's kind of an exponential curve where there's like a handful of games that I'm really, really good at. And then there's a wide range of games that I'm pretty average at. And then there's a whole, like an infinite spectrum of games that I'm terrible at.
Okay, what are the ones you think that you're really good at?
I think I'm really good at Magic. I think I'm really good at World of Warcraft. There's a couple of video games I feel like I'm pretty good at. Now, that said, like there's going to be somebody in the Reddit that's like, oh, well, we should PvP sometime. No, I will get my butt kicked. But I understand the game very well, so maybe that doesn't make me the best player, but I feel really good when I'm by myself fighting against the weak computer opponents. So
that's interesting because I just finished watching a documentary on Netflix called Last Dance. It's about the Chicago Bulls, 1998 season, but it's also a reflection of the entire career of Michael Jordan and all their championships. And it was interesting to really get into the life and head of Phil Jackson, the coach of the Bulls during that dynasty, and see how he was kind of like that, how he had a good head for basketball, but he couldn't do it himself. You know, he like understood it really well. So I wonder, what that means for you.
That's actually a really good way to make a sports analogy work here, I guess, because I feel like I cognizant and I'm intellectually, like at a thought level. I understand the mechanics and like the math and just the different ways that the games work and fit together. And then I can identify from a distance like, this is the optimal way to play this game based on the structure that it is built around. But I can't ever execute that when I'm in the game.
Yeah, why? What's the disconnect?
Man, I don't know. Maybe I'm just... Because I always feel like I'm doing really well. I'll be sitting over on my side of the table playing this elaborate board game and like, okay, I've got this going. I've got a long-term strategy. Here is my primary loop. Man, I'm going to roll and destroy these guys. And then the next turn, like my opponent's just like, oh, and boom, done. And just smokes me, annihilates me. So maybe it's the human element that I'm missing here. That, like I was talking about, I'm really good against computer opponents in World of Warcraft. Maybe if the system works exactly as my mental model predicts it will, then I'm really good at it. And then it's the other people that throw in these monkey wrenches.
Yeah. Well, what's your ranking right now on Magic the Gathering Arena?
Oh, man. I actually haven't played Magic Arena in like the last month or so.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No, right. I feel really... I don't know. I woke up the other day and realized I hadn't played it in like a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Let's transition to Bad at English. There is a phrase that... Okay, so some of the stuff I talk about that I learned while I was in England is very generalized. It's just like what Americans think that British say trousers to mean what we call pants, and yes, that's what it means. But there's some that are very regional. We've talked a little bit about like Cockney rhyming slang, and I've talked about ones that are very specific to London as opposed to in general use. Well, I lived out in the West Country, which is, I don't know how to put it in England. It's kind of like their equivalent of like Alabama.
Well, hang on a second. Isn't like the entire country the size of like, New Mexico or something?
Yeah, but it's also as densely populated as the United States. So it has regions that, with like accents and customs and different geographies and all kinds of stuff. So the West Country has a few interesting things like Bristol where, like, for instance, Bristol was a big port that was an origin of a lot of pirates. In fact, it's the origin of the pirate accent. So if you ever hear a person with like a really serious Bristol accent, they kind of sound like a pirate. Like they say hard R sounds like you don't normally hear British people say.
Huh, okay. That's
anyway,
cool.
They have this interesting phrase that they use that combines a word that means good, lush, which we might use in the United States, lush meaning something's good, and girt. The word girt means great. So they would say, "Oh, I had me Sunday roast, and it was girt lush." Girt lush means really good. And they might use the word lush all by itself or with something else. But they'll also use the word girt to modify other things. Like, I'm going to go home and have a girt big sandwich. I'm really hungry.
So that just sounds like one of those things that happens on the internet where somebody misspells an actual word and then everybody just runs with it. So This sounds like it could have been great at some point, but then somebody was just in Bristol, just super wasted on his pirate grog. And like, oh, this sandwich is girt. And then everybody made fun of him, and it became a running gag, and then other boats picked up on it. Next thing you know, everything's girt lush.
I did some research on the etymology of it and could not find anything reliable, so we're going with what you just said. It was a pirate. It was getting mocked by his friends. Done.
That's how real work gets done, is when there's a group of men and one of them's getting mocked.
So we're still in the midst of the COVID-19 weirdness, with all the kids going back to school and stuff like that. And there's this problem that keeps happening in my family. And I realized something about macro society, and I want to coin my own social maximum. I want it to be named after me. Are you ready for this?
I better be.
Okay,
lay it on me.
So my wife has always been the more cautious of the two of us, and this situation is no exception. So Alicia's always like, I don't know, should we let the kids play with their friend? I know their friend doesn't have it, but what, those kinds of things. And it feels like every time she's loosened her control a little bit, she's always regretted it. But she doesn't understand why, and I realized why. What's happening? Here's what happens. You decide to open up your restrictions a little bit, and you meet someone else who meets you halfway. And the calculation you've made is, I'm comfortable with X more. But the other person that you meet has also made that exact same calculation, and so what you get is 2X rather than X.
Yes, this is the standard sex education that you get in middle school.
Yeah, it's like STDs.
Yes, when you sleep with someone, you're sleeping with everybody that they've slept with. If you go to one little kid's birthday party, you're going to every birthday party that every little kid at that party has been to. And there are a handful of parents, especially here in our hardcore red state of Arizona, that are not taking this seriously at all.
Yeah, so if you carefully select one other person to associate with and they pick you as well, I guess you can limit it that way. But if you pick two and they pick two and all those people pick two, you've just, exponentially increased your circle. And, like Occam's razor or Schrodinger's cat, I want this to be like Ben's social maxim. I don't know what to call it.
Oh, you have a whole structure and a thing that you've identified, but you haven't coined the phrase for it yet?
Yeah, I don't know what to call it. So, and I thought about this too, and I just couldn't come up with a good one. But basically, what you need to do is decide what you're comfortable with, and then figure out what half of that is, and do that.
Okay, so that's the formula. That's the thing that you want to coin.
Yeah.
Is figure out what you're comfortable with, and then back it off a little bit.
Yeah, because otherwise you can't just say, all right, I'm comfortable allowing one of the person that, because I've heard her having this exact conversation. Well, I wanted to let the kids play with someone, but then they're also playing with other people, and all of a sudden they're going to other people's houses and there's all these strangers around, and
Yeah. No, we've had those kinds of conversations where for 5 or 10 minutes we look at the kids that are bored in the house and like, oh, these poor kids, we should probably go out and let them do something. And then we see other people out doing these things and just think about the tertiary connections touching, and little kids are the worst. Little kids are the worst, Ben.
Yeah,
putting things in their mouth all the time. No, it's ridiculous. All right,
I don't know what to do, but I'm not the one. I'm not the limiting factor in these decisions. So I just tell her, all right, but you have to be prepared for the fact that whatever you decide to do, it's going to be double that you get.
So this is like risk assessment, essentially, is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So we need to coin a good phrase for this.
It's the rule of two or something.
Yeah, it's the implicit geometric growth of contact that you accept when you go talk to other people.
But that doesn't roll off the tongue like Occam's razor.
Yeah. Ben's geometric grossness factor.
All right, let's talk about wasting time.
Wasting time is the best. And so I have struggled with this concept probably like most of my life. And now, Ben, you and I are old men these days, but when we were younger, like I remember when I was in high school and college especially, playing video games as a pastime, as a hobby, was frowned upon, looked down upon, kind of scoffed at. Like if you were a cool kid, you went out and you went outside and did things. Even if that was just throwing dirt clods at each other for the entire afternoon, that was still a more socially acceptable use of your time than sitting at a machine or a console or a TV and playing a video game, right?
There was more nuance to it than that, but I'll agree in principle. Yes.
So I remember when I was in college...
It was considered a reclusive thing to stay inside and play video games.
Yes. And it was not the socially acceptable thing to do, and you got kind of branded as the nerd or the weird kid or whatever.
Well, because you were what's it called, the outlier. There was no online gaming. You were just sitting in your living room all by yourself.
Well, and as these things tend to do, people started realizing how amazing video games are, and then here we are, having done it our whole lives. Like, yeah, where have you been? Welcome to the party. We liked video games before they were cool,
right?
But it's still, when I was in college, like I was a closet nerd. Like there was a big group of friends I had where I didn't tell them until my junior year that I was part of the wargaming club and I was a hardcore role player. And then I had these miniatures that I painted that I fought pretend battles in the year 40,000 with. Like it was like there was a lot to it that I was like keeping inside because I was afraid of the judgment, right? Now It's just, now everybody's all out in the open. But the part that I've always struggled with from the beginning is... that stigma has kind of like followed me and thinking like, is there a better use of my time? Like playing this video game, there's always the opportunity cost. Like I could be doing something productive. There's always something else that I could be doing, especially now as a parent. Holy cow, Ben, there is always something productive that I could be doing. But at the same time, I still crave those few hours where I just want to sit and just escape into some ridiculous video game or whatever.
Do you ever find yourself doing a very productive, very grown-up kind of chore to avoid doing something more difficult that you don't want to do?
Oh, man, all the time. Like, that's the chicken that you play with your spouse every night. It's like, okay, do you want to help the bedtime routine with the kids, or do you want to do the dishes? And he's kind of
right. I'm doing the dishes to avoid the bedtime routine? Yes, exactly. That kind of thing.
Man, I do the dishes every night. But it's the same thing. Like I can't escape the fact that maybe this is good. Maybe this is indicative of a healthy mind. But when I'm playing a video game, there's always this little niggle in the back of my head. Like, it's been an hour. You've got responsibilities. You're a grown up now. But then I came across this maxim on the internet, and this is directly conflicting with that little trigger in my brain. And it said, if you enjoy the time you wasted, then it's not wasted time.
Is it attributed to someone?
Probably, but I didn't take the time to write that down because who cares?
Okay.
But this is, I don't know. So I'm very, like, I like that maxim because it justifies all the time that I waste. And
if you enjoy the time you wasted, then it's not wasted time.
Which is, it kind of feeds back into your mobile gaming, right? Like you derived a lot of utility and enjoyment out of the time and presumably the money that you spent on those
games. Not $2,400 worth, but yes.
Well, that's neither here nor there. Everybody's got to draw their lines different, Ben. I wasn't trying to judge, but that's too much money.
Yeah.
So it's this constant tug of war that's going on in my brain, and this is just ammo that I saw for the other side. But of course, I'm sure this was written by some single dude that's just justifying his time spent playing Xbox, which is when you play 6 hours of video games a day, that is a completely different value equation when you are single and only have to be responsible for yourself versus when you're an adult with a family and you're responsible for other people. So I feel like I don't know. It goes back to the time value or just the value of my time, I guess. What say you, sir?
Well, there's this really famous gamer by the name of Sean Plott. He goes by his video game handle Day9. Are you familiar with him? he's a bit of a personality in the Magic community, but he was famous for StarCraft.
Okay.
And he did a vlog online on YouTube where he would just record himself talking about playing StarCraft. And in the 100th episode of his vlog, he just pours his heart out. I mean, he talks for like an hour and talks about his whole career leading up to the culmination of him winning the national championship in StarCraft. And he's in tears, and I've watched it all the way through twice, and it's moving. It is really something. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But he speaks to the gamer in all of us. He talks about how there were times where he was down and he wondered if he was just wasting all his time, but his mom was supportive of him, and how he overcame, and there was against all odds, and he won, and it was this tremendous outpouring of gratitude and this culmination of everything he'd worked towards, and it's fantastic. I'm surprised you haven't seen it, but you might recognize him. He's pretty famous in gaming circles. But I think of him sometimes because, sometimes when I like play Magic the Gathering, I wonder if I'm gonna like spike a Grand Prix or a Pro Tour qualifier and actually get to play on the Pro Tour. And I don't know, where do my dreams end for that? I don't think anyone just, sits down in front of a mobile game and imagines themselves going pro and they can just forget about all their other responsibilities in life and do that full time. But sometimes your brain just needs to waste a little bit of time. And if you enjoy the time you wasted, then it's not wasted time.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess I've just, I struggle then with the idea of the amount of time that I'm wasting, because I always want more. I always want to do more and more and more. And then I'm always shutting myself off because, I'm an adult and there's things to get done. So I don't know. It's a battle. As a responsible person, I have to make sure that I am maintaining control over my desire to waste time, because I need to create a life where my kids can waste their time and not feel bad about it.
Give an example of probably your typical conflict, like something you find yourself doing and what you should be doing instead.
Oh, well, easy. I graduated my master's degree earlier this year in mid-April, right?
Yes. Congrats.
Thank you. And I told myself I'm gonna roll right into studying for the CPA exam. I'm gonna get those suckers scheduled. I'm gonna get all of the study materials. I'm gonna knock this thing out in no time. Then here we are in late August. I have the textbooks and all the study materials sitting on my nightstand, and I tell myself every day, like, I'm gonna take the time. I'm gonna set aside the time, and I'm gonna start studying for this thing. And every day without fail, I'm like, you know what? I would very, very much rather play World of Warcraft for an hour before I have to get back into being an adult.
We're in a time warp right now. I saw that you're probably familiar with the meme. It's a 3-panel meme where a guy is just slow blinking. He stares at you and then he has his eyes closed for one panel and then he has his eyes open again. Uh-huh. And I saw one today where it was labeled June 1st, blink, August 20th. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels that way sometimes, yeah.
So here we are, August 20th. These are not usual times. I can't blame you for not. Okay, so I'm getting ready to go on this deployment, but it's not like a usual deployment. I'm going to go augment the staff at CENTCOM in MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, in Tampa, Florida. And I've talked to the guy I'm replacing, and he says they work 7:30 to 4 Monday through Friday. So unlike my other deployments where I'm working 12 to 14 hour days, 7 days a week, I'll be working banker hours. But then I'll go home to a hotel room and there won't be anyone to cook dinner for. There won't be any messes to clean up. I don't have any church callings or any responsibilities. I'm just going to have like this big pile of slack right in my lap. And it's funny you brought this up. If you enjoy the time you wasted, it's not wasted time. I could just take all that slack and just like play 1,000 hours worth of Civilization or, get really good at a deck on Magic Online. But I feel like that's not good enough. So I'm taking steps to plan what to do with that time.
You see, there's that conflict that I'm talking about. It's in you too, because like, oh man, it would be great to just go to this hotel and just kill time doing nothing or things that I enjoy all the time. But you feel it too. There's that nagging drive to be productive.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, I'll as it starts to take shape, I'll give updates on this podcast, but I want to do some writing, like some writing with the intent of getting published.
I wish. That's one thing I do miss about the military. Like for you, especially in this scenario. It's like, honey, I've got some bad news. I'm going to have to go to another state, receive extra pay, and work fewer hours. And like, there's nothing that I can do about it.
Have less responsibility at home, get to spend more time at the gym. Yeah.
It's
and
like,
you got to take care of everything.
It's going to be terrible. I'm so sorry. But I am being forced by the military to go on vacation for 6 months.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I will get paid extra while I'm there, too. Yeah. There's this talk by one of the members of the leadership of my church. His name's Down H. Oaks. He's a former state Supreme Court justice. Very distinguished man, very well educated. And he gave this talk that he calls Good, Better, Best. And he kind of talks about this in the context of religious worship, where he talks about things that you can do that are good, things that are better, and things that are best. And I hear his voice in my ears sometimes when I'm feeling this dilemma.
Oh, that's him? So when if we're cartoon characters and the little devil and the little angel pop up on your shoulders, We've identified the angel on your shoulder, like, you should be more productive.
Is this really the best thing you could be doing with your time right now?
Dude, what's really funny is whenever I imagine my devils and my angels, they're both me. And they're usually both the same person. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen those comics where, like, the third one pops up. It's like, do whatever you want, man. Like, I feel like that's the only guy that shows up when I'm having these conversations. My
all-time favorite shoulder angels are the Kronk shoulder angels in Emperor's New Groove.
So how does this have anything to do? Yeah. All right, you got me. Those are the best.
Last time you talked about... we were talking about Hamilton, and you said you and Nicole like to go to a theater there in Phoenix, and I tried to look it up and put it in the show notes, but there was a few I couldn't find out. But you said that when you go, they serve dinner. And one of our listeners pointed out to me something that you didn't appear to be aware of, and that is that there's a heavy stigma associated with theaters that serve dinner.
Really? I am not aware of that because I'm not a theater guy.
Yeah, this particular listener went, oh, dinner theater. So apparently that's considered like the bottom of the barrel if you're an actor, because they might on your off night, you might end up waiting tables.
Oh, I see. So that's kind of the lowbrow, kind of like you've sold out. You're not a real artist kind of thing.
Yeah. Like if you were talking to other artists, you're like, oh man, I was bottom of the barrel. I spent 6 months doing dinner theater. Oh, dinner theater.
I don't know anything about like the acting career field, so I don't know if it's if they actually give each other like jibes or whatever about doing dinner theater. All I can say is I appreciate the prime rib steak that I got when I was there, and I think the leading lady killed it. So I mean, say what you want about dinner theater. I had a wonderful experience.
Have you been to Disneyland lately?
No, I haven't been to
Disneyland.
I've been to Disneyland. The last time was 9 years ago.
Okay. And you've done the Jungle Cruise ride?
Oh, the Jungle Cruise ride is the best.
I know. It totally is. And the reason it is because of the people. Well, one time Weird Al Yankovic, who I adore, must have gone to Disneyland, ridden on the Jungle Cruise ride, and had a tour guide that he looked at this guy and he thought, what is this guy's story? And so he wrote a song, and there's a brilliant animation of it on YouTube. I'll put a link to it about how this tour guide on the Jungle Cruise ride is just tearing it up because he's some failed actor, and this is the low point in his career.
Yeah, I think I've seen that exact thing, like some graduate from Juilliard, and now he's on the Jungle
exactly.
Cruise ride.
Yeah.
Listen, this is like people stop giving each other crap. Like the Jungle Cruise ride guys, they kill it too. I've had both ends of that spectrum. I've had the guys that phoned it in, and then I've had the guys that were just whole hog in it, man.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you do, just love what you do.
It's not a ride, it's a stand-up performance.
And the best is for people like me, it's the same exact jokes every time. Just so awesome.
Yeah. Well, you'd written down something about sarcasm.
Sarcasm, yes. So, as we go through this COVID-19 quarantine weirdness that we keep talking about, I've been spending a ton of time with my spouse, which has been amazing. And it's also given me the opportunity to collect a ton of data on what our relationship is objectively. right? So there's me living my normal life, and then there's this overseer that kind of every once in a while like pokes my head above water and like analyzes my life from an objective perspective and is like, everything's good? Yeah, everything's good. And it just came like with all this extra data, I just noticed that my wife, I feel like the relationship that I have with my wife is atypical. Like everybody probably thinks that. Like everybody's like, oh, our relationship is special, baby. It's you and me. We're different. Nobody else on earth has ever been in love ever. It's just you and me. But the way Nicole and I communicate and the way our relationship is, it's like our standard form of communication is, I'm going to call it semi-hurtful banter. And I was starting to think about, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Like, is this bad because, like, from the outside, an outsider looking in would probably think that, we're unhappy with each other.
Your marriage is on the rocks?
Yeah, but that couldn't be further from the truth because
You'd make good British. Remember, I described this in Bad
true.
at English, how they only say, if they're being polite to you, it's because they don't like you.
All right. So, but that's what I saw. Is like from the outside, people would think we were British, right? And so then I started thinking to myself, is like, maybe there's something to this. Maybe our relationship is actually as strong as it is because we use sarcasm as like a tool, a relationship tool in order to facilitate communication or interpersonal commitment and connection. And then also I thought deliberate emotional distance might be a factor in this too. Just the idea that sometimes you just keep people at arm's length, and we do that to each other all the time because we're both kind of people that hate other people.
Even the person that you've sworn to love and to cherish and to death do you part. And
I do love and cherish her, but there are still some nights where she's like, hey, what are you doing? You watch TV? Nope. I'm going to stay here and do what I'm doing. Thanks, though.
Yeah. Well, would it stand out like if all of a sudden you were kind of serious when the other person expected the banter? Would that be like a warning signal?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Well, we can always identify, if you're starting to, one person descends into having like a really serious conversation. That's always kind of the turning point, is like the other person will be serious. Like if, I don't know how to describe it, but like when I know, like, for example, if Nicole gets really, really upset, like I can tell because there are things that she does, like she goes quiet. And then I just have to pry it out of her. And that's like, I just like pull it like a tooth from her. And she hates it when I do that, but I do. And I'm insistent. And I stay there until I get it out of her. And I know that everything's going to be fine when at the end, like at the beginning of that, she's always mad at me then for like, just leave me alone. Just leave me alone. But then I keep pulling and then the real thing comes out. And then we have, thoughtful, like good communication. And then I know we're on the downhill slope of it when she makes a joke. When she looks at me and says something like, you're such a jackass. Then I'm like, oh, okay, we're good. Like this is we're on the mend now.
That's the sign that everything's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I like to self-consciously use phrases that I hear other people use in relationships that have no rightful place in our relationship. Like, listen, about last night. I love to say that to her, and she just busts up laughing whenever I say it. Another one I like to say is, honey, there's something I need to talk to you about. Because I never say that. So if I ever do it, she knows that there's nothing wrong.
Yeah, that ties into the way that individual couples communicate, to the point where when you're with somebody long enough that your communication becomes so nuanced because you know each other so well that you develop your own secret language, right? Which is a good thing because it shows your commitment to each other. But in the current environment that we're in is a bad thing because we're spending 99.9% of our lives together. And the other day she even said, like, I'm a little worried that this is all going to be over. We're going to go back out in the real world and people will not understand a word that we're saying.
You've developed some kind of like cave people language.
Yeah, exactly. Just it's human English, but it's so wrapped in inside jokes and Netflix references that nobody's going to understand what we're talking about.
Well, do you ever, I don't know, get one kind of pop into your head that's like over the line and you don't do it, or you might anyway?
So this kind of actually ties in what we're talking about. Is I had another note, like I don't know if we had it for these notes, but it doesn't matter. It was every once in a while we're having these communications, like we're bantering, so we're always trying to be the wittier person and come up with something funny to razz the other person. And every once in a while, like I don't remember the comment, but I remember the situation. I was like brushing my teeth. I was brushing my teeth, and she said something, and I thought the perfect instant comeback But then the other part of my brain goes, if we say that out loud, we're getting slapped. And then I've described this before, but I imagine my mind as multiple people all discussing and debating what course of action.
Like on Inside Out, there's a control room. Who's in the controls?
Yeah. So it turned into this debate of, but this is super funny, but we're gonna get slapped for it. And then like at the end, like the executive in charge goes, no, it's worth it. And then I spit out my toothpaste and I said the comment, and I got slapped, and it was worth it.
Man, I never get slapped. Maybe it's just because I always have the wrong guy in the controls when those things come into my mind.
Well, this is another constant joke that goes on in my family. Is I'm 6'4", 250 pounds, and Nicole is 5'2", some weight that she won't let me know about, but far less than mine, right?
My brain was like, "What number is he gonna say?"
All right. Gentlemen, if you're not married...
Even if he knows, pretend like you don't.
Yeah, seriously. Whatever you think, like, it's like, oh, I'll just think of her weight and subtract 50 pounds. It's not enough. Like, it has to be comically low. It's like, oh, she's 5'2" and she weighs, 6 pounds. That's the only safe answer.
That's not even a healthy birth weight, Josh.
But it doesn't matter. If I say 20 pounds, she's going to look at me like, 20 pounds? Really? 20 pounds? I'm so derailed. I forgot what I was talking about originally. Oh no, yeah, well, that's a joke. Like nobody's gonna believe it when she like kills me, or when we always joke about I'm gonna be in court on the stand, just bawling my eyes out, talking about the physical and emotional abuse that I sustained from this tiny little 5'0" woman, and I'm gonna get laughed out of the courtroom. And they're gonna throw the whole thing out, and no one's gonna believe me. No one's gonna believe me, Ben.
Well, you kind of curate this personality, this image of being kind of a jerk, and I think it's situational. Like if you're in the drive-thru and they ask you to pull forward, then I see it, but most of the time you aren't. And one of our listeners pointed out to me that in the same episode where you're kind of talking about yourself as being kind of a jerk in the context of playing Magic, you had this bad experience early in your Magic career where someone ripped you off and made a really terrible trade and stole $50 from you. And instead of that turning into you into like Vengeance Man, it turned you into like the Avenger that like protects other people.
Yeah, but you see, if people think I'm a jerk, then they'll be emotionally distant from me, and I won't have to deal with them. Like, I curate this on purpose. It's that defensive shell that you show to the world to protect your squishy inner core.
Okay.
Not all of us can walk around like Ben, whose core is so squishy that doesn't matter what weapons or javelins or punches you throw at it, it just bounces back and gives you that big old marshmallow hug anyway.
I read a book about this. I think it was by Malcolm Gladwell. I can't remember which one it was, though, where he talks about how it almost is like a mental shortcut for the complexity of dealing with other people. We condense people down to these generalities, but that where their actual behaviors are very contextual. And you just gave, I just gave examples of two different contexts where, like, if you're in the drive-thru and there's people waiting behind you in line, screw those people. I'm waiting here till I get my food. Whereas if you're in the gaming store and you hear over in the corner of the room a transaction going on that doesn't have anything to do with you, you're going to go figure out what it is and get involved to make sure that someone isn't getting ripped off.
Yeah, okay.
And those two sound incongruent. Like in one situation, screw 5 people behind me, and in this situation, I'm going to help that guy over there I don't even know.
Okay. Yes. What's your point? Like, I'm telling you that I've deliberately...
So you just called me squishy. I have my context too. Let me tell you one.
Okay, yeah, give me that.
It came up this week. Sometimes I'm put in situations where I have to be a leader and you have to make a decision, and you know what they say, you can make some of the people happy all the time, but you can't make all the people happy all the time.
Yep.
Or you can make all the people happy none of the time, however it's supposed to go. Sometimes I have that exact assignment. Like one of my callings I've mentioned that I do for the church is that I'm the technology representative for the area. When we have a regional conference, I'm in charge of the audio system. And without fail, one person will come up to me at some point and say, "I can't hear. Can you turn it up?" And you're anticipating what happens next. I turn it up and someone else comes to me and says, "It's too loud. Can you turn it down?"
Oh, you see, no, what I assumed would happen, like, well, I immediately put myself in your shoes. And if somebody walks up to me and says, "It's not loud enough, can you turn it up?" My response is to slap them down so hard that they never dare stand up out of their seat again. No Bob, or I imagine it's Karen. No, Karen, I'm in charge of the PA system. If you can't hear, turn your hearing aid up. Go back to your seat and shut your mouth.
Yeah, and the best situation I have for that is I have assistive listening devices. I have, this bank of these remote receptacles that receive a rebroadcast of the PA system, and they can listen to stuff.
You actually have hearing aids to hand out. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, it's not loud enough. Here is a hearing aid. Please go away.
And that's the real solution. But man, I got to tell you, when someone comes up to me, when I've just changed something to accommodate one person, and then another person comes up to me and isn't aware of that and asks me to change it back, my blood pressure goes up. I start seeing red. Like, it makes me angry. Like, I just turned it up. Leave me alone.
This is the classic war game scenario. Ben, the only winning move is not to play.
Not to play.
Yeah, because like you said, you can't make everybody happy. So if anybody complains, like, sorry, it's just not your day. Bye-bye now.
Now, you put something in the notes that made me wonder if you ran into some missionaries from my church.
I didn't run into them. So yesterday I was out and about doing, my weekly trip out into the real world, risking life and limb, apparently, just for groceries and pizza. But I saw two poor young men on their bicycles in the 110-degree weather.
Holy crap.
In their nice slacks and their button-down white shirts, short sleeve, of course, with the ties on and the name tags. And I'm like,
I hope you look at them and you imagine me or my sons that you know.
Well, this is the thing, is before I always saw them as some, when I was very young, I had no idea what they were. As I got older, I saw them as door-to-door salesmen, essentially. Knowing you, Ben, I have more context for what these poor kids are going through. And so I couldn't, I was driving by and I'm like, man, those two kids look absolutely miserable. And then I thought, what are some of the things that maybe I could do to alleviate this situation? And I wanted to ask you, because we never talked about this on your missionary episode. So I wanted those kids to come by later that day. I wanted them to come to my door. And I wanted to open it and be like, oh yeah, you guys, come on in. Get out of the heat. And then close the door and be like, listen, I have absolutely no desire whatsoever to commit to your church or any kind of its beliefs or doctrines whatsoever. However, I do need a partner for my World of Warcraft dungeon. So one of you sit here and tank while the other one, you read from the holy book for all I care. But I need you to help me out with this. Or on the flip side, listen, I'm very interested in this. I'm going to turn on Netflix and start watching this show. You sit here on this couch in the air conditioning with me, and if it seems like I'm not paying attention, just go ahead and keep talking. Just to try to give them a break or access to things that I'm pretty sure they're not allowed to have.
Yeah. So you presented a really complex scenario there. Let me parse it a little bit. So first of all, if I was ever out, especially if it was that hot and stuff, it's discouraging and difficult and it's really challenging for a young man that just left home. He's cooking for himself, doing his own laundry for the first time ever, trying to stick to this really regimented system. And if you were ever out and someone just departed from the usual of just a very cold and impersonal rejection, it made your day. So if you said, hey, it's 110 degrees out, you guys want to come in second for a side and have a cold glass of water? Man, that was awesome whenever somebody would do that. I didn't care if they were going to listen to the gospel or not. That was fantastic whenever someone would do that. So if they do come, do that. But if you're trying to make them if you're trying to give them a chance to play video games or watch TV, they're probably not going to go for that.
You don't think so? Or they shouldn't go for that?
They're not allowed. They shouldn't go for it.
Gotcha. Okay. So then I guess what I'd have to relegate myself to is a friendly theological debate over a game of ping pong. I guess what I have to settle for.
Maybe. Hey, guys, come in for a sec. My best friend's son is on a mission right now. My brother-in-law married somebody from your church. My brother married somebody from your church. I got a soft spot for you guys, even though I'm not really going to listen. But come in and have a drink. And they may try to push a limit a little bit and see, or they may just be like, fine, and come in and have the drink, thank you, and leave.
Fair enough. Hey, you guys come in. Here, have a couple of cold sodas. I got beer if you prefer that. And now now, I'm very familiar with your doctrine. Now you and I have a hardcore debate where I'm going to tear down every one of your beliefs over ping pong. Ready, go. Because then I might find that entertaining for an hour or so. And then I wouldn't.
And so might they.
And I wouldn't feel bad after that when I kicked him out of my house. It's like, okay, this has been a thing. Now go ahead and shoo, be gone. dismissed.
Yeah.
I don't.
Anything that's just a departure from cold impersonal rejection would be welcome.
Is that going to put me on the list though? Like, are they going to report me back to headquarters and I start getting stuff in the mail? No. Are they going to come by again? Because that's unacceptable.
No, they're just people, man. If you just said, "Hey, come in. I'm not really interested, but here's something to drink."
I'm not worried about
that would be the end of it.
Not worried about the people. I'm worried about the process and the bureaucracy, because I know how that
happened to me maybe twice a month my whole mission, and I don't know that I ever went back to those houses. I just thought there's a person that like sees me as a human instead of a salesman.
That's nice. Okay. They have not come to my door that I'm aware of. I don't know. I work all day, so. But if they do, I think I might invite them in out of the heat for a minute or two, knowing full well that they are probably the creme de la creme of the nicest people ever. So
my son, as you know, was supposed to go to South America because of the pandemic. They've got him in the States working right now, practicing his Spanish. They moved him to Los Angeles. So he's there speaking Spanish, doing missionary work in Spanish. If they reopen Chile, then he'll go down to South America. And it's funny because the Air Force was doing an accountability exercise this week, and they called me and they're like, are you or any of your family members in danger of the wildfires in Southern California? And I'm like, I don't know anyone in Southern California. And my wife's like, your son? And I was like, duh.
Which your response should always be which one?
So I'm not at all worried about him. First of all, he's well into the city in the populated area, not in any of the areas threatened by the fires. But the church is very good about protecting the missionaries. If anything, he'll probably be involved in like relief efforts after the fact to, go give relief supplies and help people clean out their homes or stuff.
I'd expect nothing less. Here's my follow-up question. What if you said yes? What was the Air Force going to do about it?
Write it down in their database, I guess.
Which is the most ridiculous waste of bureaucratic time ever.
There's a lot of places, in my life in particular, there's a lot of places where the military kind of has this pseudo support structure to step in, where the church has a very well-developed, fully fleshed out support structure. Like, if I go on a deployment, the military's like, hey, do you want us to like have your wife's number and call her to see if she needs help mowing the lawn or something? And I'd be like, nah, my church will take care of it. And they're like, oh, that's good, because we didn't want to do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. I'm like, why are we even pretending, guys? We're all just going to go through this so somebody up the chain can say, we talked to every single person and identified the people that are at risk. What are we doing about it? We've identified the people that are at risk.
Yeah, if there was an evacuation and they had identified some military family members, perhaps, there would be something. I don't know.
Nope, there would be nothing. Not a darn thing, Ben. I'm telling you right now.
I always think about like disaster movies, like what was that one with Morgan Freeman, Deep Impact?
Yeah.
Or like the asteroid's going to get hit Earth and there's the secret underground bunkers and only 10,000 people get to go in. And they're like, oh, yeah, we got one here. It's on the list.
That's definitely not a thing. This is, I can't.
That's definitely not a thing.
I have said this to so many people like that are not familiar with the military, because the Hollywood loves to give this impression that the military has their stuff together, right?
Right.
Like every movie you see, every action movie, there's some disaster, and like hours later, there's a fully staffed operations center with activity, and people are doing stuff and things are getting done. And I cannot stress this enough. That is absolutely nothing like what would actually happen. It would take weeks to get anything productive actually done.
I totally agree with you.
The difference,
there are special units that exercise this all the time and that are on call to show up and set up a fully functioning operations center and stuff like that. Like, those do exist. In Transcom, we have those, and they're pretty good.
This is the thing. Like, people need to understand about the military. It's not very agile. Like you said, there are small sections of it that are built to be agile. But as a whole, the military isn't. What the military is big and heavy, which gives it a lot of momentum. So once it actually gets that ball rolling, it might take a month or two to get that operations center set up. But guess what? Once it's there forever. And it's going to be robust, and it's going to be triple redundant, and you're never getting rid of it.
Well, speaking of which, I was talking to the guy down in Florida that I'm going to replace, and because it sounds like it's just kind of like working another job for 6 months as opposed to like deploying to the Middle East. I'm like, so did they let you go on leave and stuff? He's like, yeah, I just recently went home for 2 weeks. He's like, but my wife is so paranoid about COVID, I was on quarantine the whole time. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, she had a separate bedroom for me and like stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, dude, I know we only just met, but I gotta ask, like, if I was gonna go home for 2 weeks and it wasn't gonna be a conjugal visit, I don't know that I'd want to go.
That's the first place my brain went. It's like, what's a quarantine conjugal visit look like?
Well, that's a funny thing. He was like, oh, we did it. We just both wore masks.
I don't think that's how diseases work. Oh, Ben, I have so many non-PG comments for that. Oh.
I know. Oh, man. I laughed so hard. I was so glad I asked.
Wait, you guys don't wear masks normally? Like just all the time? That's just not safe.
Well, I talked about not even thinking about the fact that my son can be endangered by these wildfires. And while we're talking about bad parenting, there's a story I want to tell you. This one will take a minute. As you know, we have 6 kids, 3 boys, 3 girls. And we were getting pretty good at it by the time we came around to the 6th one. We were living in Colorado at the time, and we were planning it out. We're like, all right, the baby's gonna come probably about December time frame. We'll drive down to the hospital and have the baby and come back home and everything will be great. And it was like 30-minute drive to the hospital on Fort Carson down in Colorado Springs. Have you ever been down to that one?
I have, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and what the part of this is that's bad at parenting is that we had failed to notice a pattern that we had established in the births of our previous children. So when you have your first, they have you go to like the birthing classes where you talk about the breathing and the preparation and how to recognize when you're going into labor and transitioning and stuff like that. And it takes a while, the body's not ready to do this very traumatic thing, to take this big giant thing and squeeze it through this tiny hole. And so it takes a while. And when Michael was born, from the time like we noticed the onset of labor and delivery till the time he was born was about 12 hours. And when our second one was born, it only took about 6. And when our third was born, it only took about 4. And then when our fourth was born, there was complications. My wife had preeclampsia, and it threatened her and him, and they ended up hospitalizing her and inducing it. And it kind of threw our brains off the trail of realizing that every time her body was getting better and better and faster at doing this. So he was born in about 2 hours, but we just completely forgot. And so when our fifth was born, from the time my wife realized she was in labor till she was out was about an hour.
That's a tight time frame for when you're trying to drive half an hour to get to the hospital.
Yes. Not only that, but every time my wife's just been in denial. Well, maybe I'm not in labor. And we're like, no, you're in labor. We need to go to the hospital. I remember, I'll never forget, we got to the military hospital at Langley Air Force Base, and we come through the door, and she is transitioning. Like, I have not done a gynecological examination, but I'm sure she's fully effaced and dilated to 10 centimeters. Like, her water hasn't broken yet, but it's going to happen any second. And we come through the door, and she's doing, like, just like in the sitcom, where she's got her hand in her lower back and her other hand on her stomach, and she's, like, puffing through her cheeks. And the airman's like, he's got his clipboard and he's like, will you fill this out and sit in these chairs over here? Can I have your ID card? Do you mind stepping onto this scale? And my wife looks at...
You just stiff arm him, right? Like the three striper?
No.
You put a palm in his face and shove him to the side as you walk past him.
She recognized, as I did, that it would take 60 seconds to weigh her, and it might take longer if we tried to thwart the process. So she laughs and steps onto the scale while she's kind of like puffing through a contraction and lets him weigh her. She's like, okay, airman, I'll step on your scale. My daughter was born 18 minutes after we got to that hospital.
Oh my
They call this a drive-by. So 12, 6, 4, 2, 1, and neither of us realized that every time these decrease by 50%. 50%, Josh. if we had noticed the pattern, we would have said, we're only going to have about 30 minutes from the time that you realize that you're in labor till the baby's out. Why don't we think about doing a home birth?
Oh, is that a thing? People have babies at home?
Well, the hospital's 30 minutes away and it takes 30 minutes. Like, you notice you're in labor. Even if you drive like a maniac, you get to the hospital, you're still having the baby as you're walking in.
I still feel like the first environment that I want to introduce a newborn child to is definitely not any room in my house. Like, that baby needs to have some kind of developed immune system before it's around my house.
So at the time I worked at Headquarters Air Force Space Command, which was the commander was trying to turn it into like a full operational headquarters, which included putting the secret network at every desk and outlawing cell phones in the entire building. So that made it very difficult to contact someone when you wanted to do something urgent, like, say, have a baby.
Oh no.
I know she's getting ready, and I predicted kind of tongue-in-cheek, they said, oh, the baby's due on Christmas. I said, the baby will be born on the 15th of December. So 15th of December rolls around. We failed to recognize the pattern. I'm getting ready to go into a 2-hour budget meeting. My phone at my desk rings, and I pick it up, and it's my wife. And she says, Ben, I think it's time. You know, like you and I were talking about, we've been married long enough that there was no need to mince words or anything like that. I said, okay, I'm on my way. I hung up the phone. I look at my supervisor. I said, my wife's having the baby. And he says, go. And so I hightailed it out of the building. And then once I hit the outside doors, I started actively running. And it was this big office building with a giant parking lot. And I was way at the end of it. So I ran, but it didn't take me more than, a minute or two to get to my car. And I got in my car and I drove. It was only 7 miles. And I drove to the home, pulled in the driveway, jumped out of the car, opened up the front door to the house, and I shout out to my wife. I'm like, Alicia, I'm here. And she says, we're in here. And on the main level of our house, we have a half bath. It's just a toilet and a sink. And I go in there, and she is holding a newborn baby, laying on the floor, still connected by the umbilical cord.
Huh? Like, that's the we she was referring to, not the other children?
Yeah, we're in here meant her and our newborn daughter.
Covered in what can only be the remnants of, like, a horror movie set.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad as you think.
That's good, because I think it's pretty bad.
I've seen 5 newborn babies before, and my brain's, like, reeling. I'm like, okay. And she goes, we're fine. We're okay. Everything's fine. Go upstairs and get the 2-year-old out of the bathtub. So I'm like, you want me to stop paying attention to you right now because the baby's in the tub. So I run upstairs and my daughter's in the tub, and I think she'd been in there long enough that, like, the water had gotten cold and her lips were starting to turn blue.
Oh, Ben, all right. So, okay, like, in that scenario, I think I would have spontaneously manifested the capacity to split into 2 physical human beings. Because one person would be, worried about the 2-year-old and sprinting up the stairs to make sure they were alive. And the other one would be lecturing my wife. You are the absolute last person to assess your well-being in this moment.
Yeah. So I took her word for it that she was okay. I pulled the 2-year out of the tub, wrapped a towel around her, put a diaper on her, and then ran back downstairs to my wife. My son had been sitting at the table the whole time eating his breakfast, and as she was bathing, so he's downstairs eating breakfast, she's bathing the baby, labor starts, she goes into denial for a little while until it's too late and she's in, like, active labor where it's, like, physically, like, she has to stop moving about every 3 minutes for a full minute. And she's trying to make it down the stairs to the phone so she can call me, and she just left the baby in the tub. And as she's coming down the stairs, she's shouting out, because of the pain of the contraction. She's like, ah! And my son's like, Mom, do you need... My 4-year-old's like, Mom, do you need anything? She's like, you stay at the table! So he's stranded at the table.
Stay right there so I don't have to worry about you.
Baby's stranded in the bathtub. She makes it downstairs, calls me, and then goes into the bathroom, the half bath, and is like, okay, we're doing this thing by myself. So, she assumes the position... pushes the baby out, catches her, and she's holding her. So I got the 2-year-old out of the bathtub, put a diaper on her, ran downstairs, and the baby's still attached. And I'm like, oh crap! Like, this happened every time, and the doctors would try to get me more involved in it, and I, like an idiot, was like, no, doc, that's your job.
No, you are the medical professional here.
Yeah, they'd be like, hey, Dad, do you want to cut the umbilical cord? No, thanks, Doc. You go ahead. That's your job. So here I am. I actually have to do it, and I'm completely drawn a blank. So,
well, I
pick up the.
Come on, objectively, intellectually, you know how it's done.
Yeah. I get it. I need to cut this thing because the baby's still attached to it. But I also remember,
you got to seal both ends.
Yeah,
and then
we could have a really a disaster on our hands here if we don't do this right. So, I kind of panicked and I pick up the phone and I call 911. And they're like, 911, what's your emergency? I'm like, well, not really an emergency, but my wife just had a baby in her bathroom and the umbilical cord is still attached. I don't know what to do. They're like, excuse me? And I'm like, well, so what do I do? And they're like, this is an advice line. We're sending an ambulance. I'm like, oh, crap, that's not what I want to happen. But then
put me through to somebody, dang it.
I thought, I don't know what else is what I expected to happen. So I hang up the phone. I'm like, well, I'm not waiting for the ambulance to get here. I got to do this. So I'm like you said, I need to seal both ends of this thing, and then I need to cut it. So I run around, and I'm looking for something to tie it off with and something to cut it with. And you know how it is. Whenever you need to find a pair of scissors, you can never find a pair of scissors.
Ben,
I cannot.
I've eliminated that problem in my house because we just have 2 pairs of scissors in every room.
What did you do when the baby started wanting to cut things?
Oh no, that's a whole nother bad at parenting story. Please go ahead.
Okay, so all I could find was a pair of snub-nosed toddler safety scissors.
Oh, get out of here.
And
You've got steak knives, man. Come on, you can't possibly.
Steak knives. So I go run into the bathroom with some kite string and the safety scissors, and she looks at it and she's like, okay. And so I pick a spot on the cord. The baby's still attached and the baby's moving and breathing and fine. No one's crying or anything like that. Wife seems to be fine. Baby seems to be fine. Everybody's pink and colored. I did pay attention for the APGAR scores. There's no visible trauma or stress of any sort. No bleeding or anything. So I pick a spot, close to the belly button, and I tie the string off in 2 places pretty close to each other, and then I saw through it with these safety scissors.
How long did that take? Were they plastic? Did they break?
And no, they weren't plastic, and they didn't break, and we still have them for sentimental reasons.
Of course you do.
I'll put a photo of them in the show notes. And so I'm holding the baby, and I'm like, okay, the baby's attached. Great, and the baby's attached. Now what do I do? So I went and found a blanket, and I wrapped the baby up, and then I'm like, I can't remember if I gave her to the 4-year-old or if I just set her on the floor or something, but I'm like, I got to put the baby down and deal with the mom because the baby's fine. So
didn't you had 6 kids. Wasn't there a bassinet within 3 feet of you?
It was a school day and the 2-year-old had already moved out. So yeah, I just put the baby on the floor. I'm like, okay, I think we need to get the placenta out of you. So hold still and I'll pull on this rope here.
I'm just gonna pull this part and we'll see what comes out. And
she pushed and I pulled and it came out very easily.
That's good.
Just like I wanted. And I'm like, okay, we'll just leave that over here on the floor and can you get up or whatever? And so we got her up and we moved her to the couch and she was holding the baby and the doorbell rings and it's the ambulance. And the ambulance driver comes in and they're like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, we just had a baby. He's like, oh my gosh. I'm like, well, sorry to bother you. Everything seems to be okay. We were just going to pile everybody in the car and go to the hospital.
Ladies and gentlemen, Benjamin Rich, the nicest man on the planet. Listen, I'm really sorry to trouble your day with my medical emergency. If it's not too much trouble, would you mind helping me out?
Well, there's this part of me, Josh, because my mom had 4 of us 6 kids at home. So this wasn't a new idea to me. I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me. We should have just planned it in advance and done it very comfortably. This has been happening quite naturally for thousands of years. So he goes, listen, man, we get called out for all kinds of things. This is the most legit call we've had in 2 weeks.
That's funny.
I'm like, okay.
You, by far, hands down, were way more prepared to handle that situation than I was. I remember the birth of my first son, I fainted 2.5 times. So there was...
What? I did not know this.
Oh, man, I can't handle any of that stuff. Like, I remember, like, they were giving Nicole her epidural for the first time. And I was holding her up and I had her, like, her forehead against my forehead. And she's looking at me. And then they had, of course, because it's a hospital, they had the guy who's been doing it for 45 years, knows everything about everything. And then the guy who's been here for 3 days that's on the job training is like, oh, no, we're going to have you do it, kid. And so, like, Nicole would describe the sensation of the needle scraping, like, her vertebra as the guy was trying to get the epidural in correctly. And
you almost made me faint.
So I'm here holding her up. And then I talked to our nurse. Nurses, by the way, God, love nurses. It's like, whatever her name was. Like, Sally, would you mind holding my wife up for a second? Oh, sure, no problem. And she came over and took my wife. And I turned around and started walking away. And Nicole goes, where are you going? I'm like, I'll be right back. No problem. I went out the door. I turned 90 degrees. I took one step and then out of her line of sight and then completely lost consciousness.
Did you hit your head?
I don't remember. My mother-in-law came out a couple minutes later and found me, like, sitting against the wall. And, like, I was just coming back to consciousness.
Wow. Okay, well, here's a question for you, though. That's fine in the hospital, and you made a very conscious decision to, like, not trouble other people and stuff. But if you're at home and you're the last line of defense, you're up to this, right? You can do it.
It's the same thing we were talking about, like when my kid was choking on mashed potatoes, and I didn't panic until well after the situation had been resolved. So maybe, hopefully I'd be able to step up in that, but I have never been a big blood guy, man. Like, I remember I told them, like, in the room where they did the C-section for my wife, like, I'm going to need a chair. Like, I'm just going to need a chair, or else you all are going to be trying to drag my lifeless carcass out of that room at some point. I remember holding Nicole's hand, and then, like, they're doing their thing, and they had the sheet up, and I'm not going over there. I'm not going on the other side of the sheet. I'm just with her. I'm like, you're doing so good, and my vision keeps tunneling and then coming back, and then tunneling and coming back. And then I heard, like, a suction noise kick in. And there was this jar on the wall that was hooked up to the vacuum. And it started filling with the brightest red blood that I'd ever seen. And again, my vision went to, like, pinpricks. And Nicole goes, you're hurting me. And I go, what? She goes, stop squeezing my hand so hard. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
so,
man.
Yeah, so I'm not good in messy situations like that.
Yeah, those are rough moments. Well, the ambulance drivers pronounced everyone good, and so we were like, well, we might as well go into the hospital and, like, get a birth certificate or something. So we buckled her in a car seat and drove to the hospital, put her in a wheelchair, and drove up to the maternity ward. And they're like, hey, we're here at the baby. And they're like, yeah, right this way to the the labor and delivery room. We're like, no, we already had her. They're like, oh, the other way.
Like, is there? Yeah, at what point do they've got to pick up the process now, right? They've got to do, like, the post stuff with everybody. Like,
right. It's almost like they still want to, have a step on the scale or whatever. No, you need to skip steps in the process here. We're already past that part.
Well, dude, seriously, good on you. Like, that's a situation not a lot of people are prepared to handle. I'm glad everybody is okay. And, like, that's another one of your mind-shattering stories of the life, the normal day of Ben Rich.
Yeah. So when we sold that house, we told them it includes a birthing suite.
Now, my favorite part of that whole story is your wife had the presence of mind to go into a tiled room to make a giant gourd nest.
Instead of ruining our new carpets.
Yeah, exactly.
I have been waiting for a while to kind of do an interview with you, and I wanted to ask you about something that you consider kind of mundane, but I think our listeners will find very interesting. So to our audience, Josh, before he left the Air Force, transitioned from the communications and information career field to becoming a pilot for remotely piloted aircraft or drones. So Josh is a former drone pilot, and I wanted to ask you some questions about what it's like to be a drone pilot.
And so I am loath to talk about those days because they were a low point for me. But I will answer your questions, Ben, because you are worth it. I do have to caveat that there is a lot of information in that whole world that is highly classified. And so if I can't answer a question, like, I can expound on things as much as I can, but there's going to be things that I'm just going to have to stonewall you on, and I'm sorry in advance for that.
Well, talk about that for just a second. When you left the Air Force and you were no longer, like, under the umbrella of security clearance, what kind of agreement did they put you under?
So for all security clearances, it's the same thing. Like as you increase your clearance level, you get more and more intricate in briefings and out briefings. I'm not going to talk about the different levels of security clearance, but one of the things they talk about is if at any point in your life you have such and such level of clearance and you're going to publish any kind of work, like if you're going to write a book, even if it's a fiction fantasy book, like you have to have it cleared through a security office in the DoD. So like, and they say like, even in their briefings, they talk about, we have a guy who used to do like classified work, like 30 years ago, and now he is a best-selling author of Westerns. He has to get every one of his Westerns cleared through our office before he's allowed to publish it, because that's just the world that we live in.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah, there you go.
So you went to the United States Air Force Academy and got a degree in computer engineering.
Computer science.
Computer science. Now, if I remember correctly, you originally wanted to be a pilot when you got into the Air Force, but then found out you weren't very good at flying?
No, absolutely not. I went into the Air Force Academy knowing that was the best place to go to be a pilot, and that I had absolutely no desire to be one whatsoever.
Okay, so what before you had even been assigned your permanent job in the Air Force, what did you want?
So I wanted to be like I got my degree in computer science, and when I was there, it was the first rumblings of they were going to create like a cyber command, like they were going to stand up a no kidding militarized counter hacking kind of like operation center or commander.
So you're imagining yourself banging away at a keyboard fighting the bad guys.
Yes, I imagine myself in a dark room with green code on the screen, like just on the front lines of the cyber war. And like this, like I said, I was on the ground level. I was perfectly poised to get in on all of this, right? I'm getting a degree in computer science.
Sure. The timing was right.
Yeah, exactly. Like everything was going my way. And so then,
so obviously fast forward, 5 years?
So I got what I wanted. I asked to be a communications officer. I was assigned to be a communications officer. I went to Langley Air Force Base, which is a MAGCOM base. So I mean, that's a place to be if they're gonna stand this up. And it turned out that it was, because they stood up a cyber operations unit at that base while I was there. Here's the problem, Ben. What I didn't know at the time is that the Air Force doesn't give two craps about your aspirations or your education or your background.
Oh, I remember learning that early on, just being very disillusioned about the fact that they don't care.
Nope. So here I was, Mr. like gung-ho. I did an internship at the NSA while I was in college for hacking and counter-hacking. Like I have built my entire aspirations and career to be this counter-information warfare officer. And they came out with the volunteers like, okay, we're going to stand up this new unit. We need volunteers. And I'm the first guy in line. Yes, please send me to the extra training and transfer me over there. Like, oh, well, you're at the base communication squadron and not the MAGCOM communication squadron down the street. So we're actually not going to send you. Instead, we're going to send your counterpart at that other unit
that doesn't want to go,
who is a general management
isn't
major,
qualified.
who went to some random school in ROTC, doesn't give two craps, and we're just going to non-vol him into that new career field.
Yeah,
and it was just very disappointing because like everything was playing out so well, but there's two communication squadrons on that base, and I had a 50-50 shot, and I went into the wrong one.
Wow. Okay, so you're a little disillusioned. You give it like 5 years just doing like the base comm support thing where you're kind of a leadership, you're doing like help desk kind of things and infrastructure projects and
I did a lot of different things at the base comm squadron, and I'll tell you, I like blowing my own horn because I love the props. People, I'm amazing and everybody should love me. But like in this case, like at the time I had the awards and the accolades to kind of back up. Like I talk a big talk, but at that time I also walked the walk. Like I have a ton of big Eagle statues that I was awarded with. Like I was very motivated, I was well educated, and I was passionate about, communications. Base network was great. I worked at ATCALS for a while, which was fascinating.
Air traffic control and landing systems.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. All the lights and radar systems that pilots use to land, and it's so fascinating because those things are built in like the 1920s and 30s, and we're still using the same equipment. And so integrating that with digital systems is just excellent. Anyway, like I said, our career field, there's no requirements for being a comm officer. So it's every end of the spectrum, from the bottom of the barrel guys that couldn't qualify for the job that they wanted, all the way up to me, who wanted passionately to be there. And so it was easy to distinguish myself in a field full of apathetic other people.
Right. You got people with non-technical degrees and, ended up doing that when they wanted to do something else. And
yes. So I felt good about it. My problem was then I started getting disillusioned with, at the time I thought it was individual people. What I didn't realize was that it was the system in general. Because I had 2 really excellent supervisors that recognized me for what I was and gave me like everything that you want. Like, you're a capable, smart person. We're going to give you the rope to run, and we're going to they give you expectations and go, yea, verily, and do. And then the other end of the spectrum, I got way more of these supervisors where they're used to having people that have absolutely no idea what they're doing, and they want to micromanage everything that I do, which drove me so nuts. And I thought it was those individual people, but it wasn't. It's the system creates people like that because there are so many. I was the exception, not the rule. The rule is you have apathetic people that barely understand the systems that they're managing. And so it requires heavy-handedness in order to make sure everything doesn't fall to pieces in a heartbeat.
I have a unified theory about this that I wrote a paper about when I was at school in 2018. I don't want to go into it now, but basically, I'll save that topic for another day. But basically, the military favors that individuals are replaceable rather than that they are experts.
Which is a byproduct of a system where you change jobs every 2 years. You can't ever get really invested in anything because you're going to leave.
I'll take it one step further than that. I'll say it's a byproduct of a system where you want to be able to draft an average or below average person from general society and have them step into a role and have the whole machine execute.
There you go. So imagine a system built for not maybe the 40 percentile of society. The system is built to support them. And there's me, highly motivated, highly capable, and I just want to do so much good in the world, and I keep falling flat on my face or running into obstacles. At the time, I perceived these people as obstacles, not the system as the obstacle. So I had a lot of vitriol and a lot of bitterness for individual supervisors when I should have been railing against the system.
So you described the situation in which you came in trying to hope to get into the new cyber thing that was standing up, and how there would be these opportunities that would pop up. And as I heard throughout my career over and over and over again, they would say timing is everything. And what they meant by that is the timing is completely outside of your control, and maybe you'll get lucky. That's what that means when they say timing is everything. So sometimes something will pop up, and it's right when you're supposed to move, and you're available, and you know the right people, and you can get into it, and sometimes you won't. And it sounds like you just missed, your timing wasn't right for the cyber thing. However, fast forward a few years, what year were we actually talking about here? The drone thing starts to blow up.
Oh, so we're talking 2009, 2010 timeframe. So what is happening here is that the Air Force is standing up a new capability. And the capability is referred to as persistent ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, right? This goes back even, but we've got to go so big to drill down to what drove this thing. And the big picture was that the global war on terror was the thing. It was where all the funding was. It was where all the legislation was going. It was where all the news media was. The focus of the highest levels of government was on the global war on terror. The problem is, our Air Force was not built for a very low-level insurgent war like this.
The Air Force was built to fight Russia in the Cold War.
We were spending tens of millions of dollars on individual fighters that were Cold War fighters. These are dogfighting machines to shoot down other first world, Tier 1 anti-air assets. Well, guess what?
And you can't fight a terrorist on a camel with that.
Does you zero good when you're trying to find a guy in a town in Afghanistan.
Right.
And so the Air Force sprinted to try to make themselves relevant, because the fact of the matter is the DoD is 5 separate departments, and they're all bucking for a piece of that budget pie. Oh, give me that sweet, sweet dollar bills. And if we can't justify our existence in the current political environment, then we're not going to get the budget.
So the Air Force recognized the way to do this was drones.
What do we have now, or something that we can stand up immediately that can contribute to the war, to the current important war, in a way that justifies our spending? And the answer to that was persistent intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, persistent ISR, specifically drones.
We can take photos of this spot on the globe all day and night.
The idea being that the persistent part is key, because we already have ISR assets. We have just, Ben, let me tell you, we have some of the coolest stuff when it comes to surveillance and reconnaissance. Like, it's just so awesome. But they all have gas tanks, and those gas tanks are limited by the size of the airframe, which is limited by the person sitting in the thing. Now, if you can take the person out of the plane, you can make that much, much smaller, or dedicate all of their space to gas. And now all of a sudden you have an asset that, instead of being on station for a few hours, is now on station for a few dozen hours.
Right.
And that's the key. And that's why, so the Air Force makes this push to justify their existence in this new style war. And they start,
right, which means transforming the whole enterprise. Like, we're going from the getting a fancy, sexy fighter jet with a pilot in it and all the maintenance and background and support that goes into that, to taking this tiny little airplane and all the different set of skills and disciplines that go into that. And that means not just transforming the technologies to, like, have the data feeds going in and out of it, and the whatever else is needed to support that, to developing the professionals that would operate it and utilize it. And so this call goes out to the Air Force. Hey, who wants to be part of this exciting new thing that we're doing? What made you decide to raise your hand?
Well, before we even get there, because the first thing they did is they said, okay, we need volunteers to do this new thing and fly these drones, from all of you pilots out there who signed up to be Top Gun. These guys all grew up watching Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer dogfighting on Top Gun.
Even though that's a Navy movie.
Yeah. Still, the best recruiting movie for the Air Force ever. That's what everybody signed up for. That's what they wanted to be, tooth and nail. And now, okay, we need volunteers to come fly basically a fancy remote-controlled airplane for the rest of their career. Who's in? And
who wants to go sit in a dark room in New Mexico?
Shockingly, when they didn't get enough people, then it goes that second round where it's like, okay, guess what, everybody? We still need bodies, so every single flying unit needs to send X number of people, whether they like it or not. Yeah. And then the Air Force is run by pilots, which is both a good and a bad thing. Pilots are the actual direct warfighting unit in the Air Force, and they're the ones with their butts in the seats. So they're the ones that have their life on the line, so they need to be the decision makers. However, I will get into this later, but pilots have a severe deficiency in management skills and understanding how large organizations work.
And there's exceptions, but yes, it's not default for them. Their job is managing an aircraft.
I will get there. I will get there. Don't you worry. But so then the pilots in the room are like, you know what? It really sucks having to send guys to go fly this thing that nobody wants to do. Like, nobody wants to do it. Like, it's nobody, no real pilot that wanted to dogfight ever wanted to go do this thing. Is there a way? It's not really a real airplane. Is there a way we can maybe cheat the system and get kind of pilots in? And so then they sent out they did a test run, and they called it the beta program, because we were beta testing this idea, is that they asked for volunteers of all of the support services. Like, you had to meet certain physical requirements, certain aptitude requirements. Like, I had to go through some extensive testing.
This is kind of an ego hit. Even though they didn't want to do it, they also have to admit that somebody who's not a career pilot could do it.
Yes, but they then set the bar really, really high. Because of this, they sent out this to the entire Air Force, every officer in the Air Force. Like, if you want to be a drone pilot, here's the opportunity. And of the more than 1,000 applicants, they picked 10 or 15 people. I can't remember how many were in my class, and I was one of them. And
did they make you dress up in your service dress and go into a bright white room and sit in an egg chair and do a test on a Scantron?
No, but they kind of, like, not ridiculous like that, but we did have to, I had to go TDY for 3 days to Texas to take a bunch of really weird medical tests, that I didn't realize, I didn't know what they were at the time. I don't even know where to go from here, but the place I was at in my career was, again, I was in this squadron where I felt like I was doing great work, and I felt just empowered and doing great. And then my supervisor, who I love to death, and that guy is great. I still Major Kern, that guy. I'm sure he's a full bird by now. He was just the best. He PCSs out, and his replacement was the worst. I went polar opposites. This guy.
That's the thing about the fundamental manpower paradigm in the military, is you could get the best and replaced by the worst. I
had to hack that guy's calendar. I had to call the comm squadron and pull some favors to get access to his calendar so I could make sure that I was in the same staff meetings that he was in every single day to make sure he didn't volunteer me for any more nonsensical BS that he said he was going to take care of and then immediately shoveled to me.
Okay, so you're having a miserable time because of your circumstances, and then out of nowhere, this opportunity pops up that looks like you can escape.
And I thought to myself, in some delusion, because again, I thought it was people, not the system. I thought, you know what? The problem is I'm not close enough to the fight. Everybody that's there actually on the lines, they've all got to have it straight, right? They've all got to be straight shooters. They've all got to be real with each other, and they've all got to acknowledge the things that got to get done in order to make this happen. So maybe this is my opportunity to get into a place where maybe my talents and I'll be appreciated more and I'll have a better time or whatever. And I just deluded myself into thinking it was an escape. Like
Josh, I lived that delusion my entire life as a military brat. Every time, I'd go to like middle school and feel like I wasn't popular or successful, I'd think, you know what, next time my dad moves, then I'll get a fresh start and then I'll be able to be awesome in the new situation. And it was always the same.
Ben, that is exactly what happened. And so I just had the misfortune of having the aptitude to actually be selected for it.
You were good enough to meet their very high bar, they said.
Yes.
Okay. So you saw this as an opportunity to change and escape. You elected for it. You met their requirements. What was the training like? What are you, like a full-fledged pilot now?
So, kind of. I'm going to give you a kind of. So there are several steps that an Air Force pilot goes through in order to become a pilot. The very first one is IFT, Introductory Flight Training. This is every lieutenant in the Air Force that gets assessed that says you're going to be a pilot. That's the first place you go. It is a 6-week program in Pueblo, Colorado. It is a fantastic program. They take college graduates off the street knowing nothing about an airplane to fully capable of taking off, flying a sortie on their own and landing within 6 weeks.
Wow.
It is a real kick in the butt. I'll tell you that right now. Like, they do
Don't
nuts.
you get motion sickness?
This is why when I went into the military academy, Ben, I told myself, they asked me, don't you want to be a pilot? I said, nope, I have no desire because I have the world's worst motion sickness ever. So there's 2 types of motion sickness. There's the one where your ears say that you're moving and your eyes say that you don't. That's like if you're trying to read in a car. The car is moving, but the thing that you're holding isn't. And so your brain, your eyes and your ears don't communicate well. That kind of motion sickness will put me on the floor in the fetal position, rolling on the ground. But the other kind of motion sickness, where your eyes say you're moving and your ears say you don't, that doesn't bother me at all. Because that's video games. That's every video game you've ever played. Sitting on a couch playing a first-person shooter. Like, yeah, at first that's called simulation sickness, and you can get sick from it, but you get over that really quickly. I don't get simulation sickness because, shockingly, listeners, I played a lot of video games at the time.
I'm practiced.
Right. And so I thought, all right, so they identified...
That also infers that you could practice your way out of the other kind of motion sickness.
Oh, there is, Ben. There is a method of getting over that motion sickness.
Like they just put you in a chair and spin you around until you puke and just keep doing it until you don't anymore?
They put you in a chair in a 5-point harness and around...
Oh, you've done this?
No.
You've been in the spinning chair?
No, because that sounds miserable. But I saw it, and they said, like, if you can't get over the motion sickness, we have a motion sickness program. And I turned sheet white, like, no, I will die before I do that. So what the chair is, they put you in the chair in a 5-point harness, and there's a tennis ball in front of you, behind you, and on either side. And as they're spinning you, they tell you left, right, forward, or back, and making you move your head the whole time. And they do this until you throw up. And then when you're done throwing up, they put you back in the chair, spin you the other direction, and make you do it until you throw up again. And they say, okay, we'll see you tomorrow. And about after a month of that, apparently you get over it.
Whoa.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
These are the kinds of things that, like, to a civilian that's just like, they want to, I don't know, I had to take a drug test so I could get hired on at McDonald's or something. Like, that's so far outside the realm of normal, everyday, like, bar you got to get over. Like, all right, you're going to puke every day for a month to get this job.
No, twice a day for a month as part of your academic training. And you're also required to do all the other stuff. No. But they put me on, they called air sick cap. So they acknowledged that I have air sickness because my first flight, we had to terminate early because I was going to hurl all over the dashboard. So in Pueblo, Colorado, you fly these little motor glider things. They're really small. There was actually a question of whether or not I was going to be able to fit into it, like because if the canopy was going to close all the way.
Yeah.
So, but I was barely on the cusp where if you took the seat covers off and I sat on the molded fiberglass directly, then I fit. And so I got to sit on the molded fiberglass instead of the nice cushy cushions.
That sounds terrible.
It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. My shoulder touched the outside of the canopy and my instructor's shoulder the entire time, every flight. It was a tiny little airplane.
Okay. I'm going to be a bit of a skeptic here. Why do you have to know how to fly a little airplane with you in it if you're going to just be flying drones?
Because that's how you learn how to fly. Like that is the Air Force program to teach a non-flying person how to become an entry-level pilot. So,
but isn't my understanding correct that for takeoff and landing, it's controlled locally by someone at the airfield with visual contact?
Let me answer your overall question here. For the beta program to fly drones, that was the only physical airplane that I was in throughout my entire course of training.
Yeah.
And the only reason I had to get into that aircraft is because that was the only program they had to teach somebody how to fly at that level. The absolute bare bones basics. That's what they had at the time. And they're not going to stand up a new training program just for drone people. They're just going to shove them through the same pipeline that everybody else goes through.
Right. This course was already prepared and developed.
Exactly. So I had 6 weeks, and I told, all I had to do was...
They just need you to have the knowledge of the fundamentals of an aircraft flying in the air.
Well, I still had to take off, fly a sortie by myself, and land the plane, solo. I had to do it all on my own by the end of it. So I can fly a plane. That's not mince words here. I know how to fly a plane.
All right. So if you're a passenger on an airliner and the flight attendant bursts out of the cabin and says, "Is anyone a pilot?" and nobody else says anything.
That's the key. First of all, I'm going to let somebody else pitch in. I'm going to look around the airplane like anybody else, dang, is it really going to be me? Then yes, I'm going to step up because I know how to fly a plane. I know how to fly a plane. I have to tell my kids this all the time. It's wow, airplanes are cool. I'm I know how to fly airplanes, but it's fine. Nope.
Okay. So you'd be like, I'm a pilot.
And here's the other thing. If somebody else said, "Oh yeah, I'm a pilot," then I'd be like, "What kind of pilot?" It's "Oh, I fly whatever." and yeah, if he's better than me, then sure, absolutely, I'll let him do it. But okay. I will volunteer to be his co-pilot.
Defer to the guy with the bigger beard.
But but I also have enough training to recognize, you know what you're going to need is a guy sitting next to you that can talk on the radio while you're doing all the actual real work. So I'd volunteer for that role too.
Okay.
So anyway, 6 weeks in Pueblo, Colorado. I go from not knowing anything to flying a plane by myself, which was a miserable 6 weeks.
Nice.
I was the air sick cap thing meant that I flew first thing in the morning every morning. So it was I had to be up at 3:30 every day.
How cool is that, man? I mean, we're in the United States Air Force. You were just sitting in a base answering trouble tickets for somebody's computer broke, and then 6 weeks later you're flying a plane by yourself.
Yeah, it was terrifying. I'll give it that. It was terrifying, but it was also really cool. I guess I don't know. But anyway, I remember my check ride. It was my last final check ride, and I couldn't fly first thing in the morning, so I was going to fly during the hot weather and the turbulence and all that. And so I was just doing my best to fight through it. That entire 6 weeks, I ate nothing but white bread, and I took ginger pills every morning to try to settle my stomach because I'm not allowed to take Dramamine or nothing. And I remember on the check ride, we were 3/4 of the way through. I had already done a couple of touch and goes on the auxiliary airfield, so the guy knew I knew how to land. He knew I knew how to make good decisions. He knew I could communicate with the towers and get my clearances and things. And he goes, "Okay, I'm bored. You've passed your check ride. Do you mind if I take over the rest of the flight?" And I went, "Yep, your airplane. I'm 3 seconds away from puking my guts out. Please take over." And he passed me on the check ride, but I had the barf bag open in my hands for the rest of the time that we were flying.
Wow. All right. So now this is also about the same time that you got married. So did Nicole help you make this decision?
So funny thing about that, it's more the other way around. It's more hey, I'm going to PCS because of this program. And the Air Force doesn't recognize engagements. It recognizes marriages. So there was no, this is a whole different story.
It was fish or cut bait time.
Yeah, exactly. And so.
All right. I actually want to do that story full justice. So we'll talk about that some other time.
There's a lot of drama around the timing about how everything played out.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Anyway,
okay.
So 6 weeks in Colorado, done. I'm a pilot now. Or I'm not a pilot now. I've gone through.
Now, when you volunteered for this, did you know where you would be consigned to for the rest of your career?
We're not there yet, Ben. Nope, I have no idea. We go after the Pueblo, Colorado. They sent us to San Antonio, Texas. This is the second phase of flying that every pilot in the Air Force goes through. They fly T6s in San Antonio. T6 is a 2-seat turboprop airplane. It looks like a World War II fighter plane. It really does. It's got the front back seat arrangement. It's got the big
it looks like
canopy.
the planes from Planes that we were talking about from Disney Pixar cars.
Yeah, it's got the big
planes,
the big prop on the front, low wing, bezeled wing. Like, it's the whole thing. Cool thing about that plane, it's also got one of the best ejection seats in the Air Force because it's a training. Yeah. But we were not required to fly those planes. I think the people now might be required to, but we weren't. We were there for instrument training only. So we did nothing but flight simulators, and like the legit flight simulators, not like your PC desktop, but actual, like you're sitting in a mock-up cockpit of a T6 learning to fly on the instruments of the airplane.
Right.
So, which is really weird because a lot of the simulators didn't have any screens. Like, you couldn't see anything where you were, but the GPS and everything was simulated just fine.
What? So it was like you're flying with just instruments and like your windows are blacked out?
Exactly. But there's just no windows. It's just the rest of the open room. And so usually you go in pairs so one person can help you. Like, you're talking through the whole thing and learning together. But everything is on the instrument stand in front of you and everything works exactly right. Like, we did, some of the instructors graded us on the tricks. I'm going to call them tricks or maneuvers that we did in the air based on just how they looked on the instruments. Like, we had to do split S's. We had to do all the other tricks that I've completely forgotten because you don't ever do it for real. But like, we had to do all that stuff.
Huh. So you never actually flew a T6?
We had the opportunity. So it's a whole thing like, oh, you guys, you've been training this whole thing and you're real pilots. We're going to get you like an incentive ride, they call them, on the T6s. They're just going to book a sortie and let the guys towards the end of training go out and fly. And I gave my slot to somebody else. They're like, oh, we got slots for everybody. And I'm like, sir, you can have my slot. It's like, you don't want to fly? It's like, I have never physically wanted to fly ever.
But you're making me. If it's optional, I will opt out.
So that actually got me in real big trouble. That attitude. This is a little side story, but I was, you're
supposed to want to.
Well, it was 5 days a week of training, right? But only 2 or 3 of those days were actually with an instructor, one-on-one in a cockpit or in a simulator. Most of the time it was either academic stuff in a group or you just worked on your own. So when we had the time with the instructors, it was incredibly critical that we just got what we got out of it, right? And I remember being in a simulator, one of the good simulators with a screen this time, and an instructor. And like, we're going through the beginning and I've got an hour and a half with this guy, and like we're on takeoff and he's talking to me. He's like, oh, what about the oxygen generation system? What do you know about that? I go, I know that I turn this switch on like this and then I get oxygen in the mask. And then he pauses the simulator and starts explaining, well, it's important to know some of this stuff, so let's talk about it a little bit. And I stopped him. I go, sir, with all due respect, I am never going to physically be in a cockpit that has this system necessary for me to do things. I would much rather focus on the academic material that I'm going to be tested on for this training, and that is, the instrument flying. And the guy goes,
oh, dude.
Oh, what? Go ahead.
I can so sympathize with that feeling, and yet I can feel where this is going. Like, people don't like that. They just want you to listen and while they tell you everything they know. So
this 60-something-year-old, like, veteran instructor pilot, civilian guy who has taught, everybody from, Hap Arnold up through the current fighter pilot generation. And in the moment, he goes, okay, sure, no problem. Unpauses the simulator and we go forward. I'm like,
yeah, he wrote your name
down. That's great. This is fantastic. I then that afternoon got called to the carpet by my squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel, like,
bad attitude.
Like, what in the crap did you tell that guy? I'm like, and I explained the scenario, and he's like, I'm going to let you listen to the voicemail he left me. And like, that guy was screaming into his phone, like, this is the most insubordinate, ridiculous, unbelievable. And I'm like, sir, I tried to be as respectful as absolutely possible, but I felt my time was better used this way. And then the colonel politely explained to me, listen, Captain, second lieutenants come through this training, so you need to act like it. And I didn't like that answer either, but okay, fine. That wasn't the last time that I got into a big, like, drag out, punch out with an instructor pilot because I had a brain higher than a second lieutenant at the time.
Yeah, you're giving me PTSD of so many times in my career where that exact thing happened, where I was just too high for the point where I was at, and you just have to reset. You have to pretend you're a second lieutenant, or you're just not going to fit in.
So anyway, After we got the...
Well, let's fast forward a bit. So the Air Force decided they needed you to have all these skills for flying aircraft with things like ejection seats and life support systems that are really irrelevant to what you're actually going to be doing.
I will say this, like for having to take what they had on hand and create a training pipeline that gave me the skills necessary to do the job they wanted me to do, they did a fantastic job. I felt like at the other end of that, like I said, I felt confident enough to yes, I can land this airliner to save our lives. So like kudos to the Air Force for creating a pipeline that I went through in less than a year that normally takes, like, if you're going to train an actual fighter pilot, it takes years to cultivate those kinds of skill sets.
Okay. So then at some point they're like, all right, now that you've learned all that about flying manned aircraft, now we're going to teach you the Predator. What was that like? What was the difference?
So the differences were vast and startling. So mostly, again, it was simulator stuff because it's really easy to simulate a drone cockpit because it's exactly the same cockpit. You just get different data fed into the computers that you're looking at.
So you're still just sitting in a dark room with a bunch of instruments in front of you?
Mostly. But it was the actual setup. So it was like what we sat down in front of was the actual setup that we had when we flew, for real sorties and all that stuff. That training was much more specific on basically the assumption is how to fly. Here's how you fly this aircraft. And then the fact that it was remote, a lot of things are very, very different. Like, for example, 99% of the flying I did was all autopilot. And it was me managing the autopilot because most autopilots in planes aren't super sophisticated. Like, they probably are now, especially in the commercial realm. But at the time, it was mostly maintain this altitude and airspeed. And that's all you could really trust the autopilot to do. In ours, it was very... like, I'm going to draw this elaborate shape on the computer screen, and at every point, I'm going to tell it how high to be and how fast to go, and it's going to do all of that on its own. So it was a much more kind of a cranial exercise in flying, and as opposed to stick and rudder skills. It was
right, because you want this aircraft to loiter, at altitude above a particular geographic point.
Right, and so then how do you optimize? Like, if I'm going to be doing this specific mission there, then I'm going to need to fly this kind of a route, and there's this kind of weather pattern, and there's these kinds of obstructions. So how do I optimize where the plane is and how it's operating?
My brain just exploded with all the complexities. Like, then you got to deconflict the airspace with civilian aircraft and just all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were just operating on wartime rules, just screw it.
We had to know this is the thing. Also part of that training is they gave us all of our pubs, all of the publications and rules and restrictions that as a pilot you were responsible for. And they gave it to us on a CD. And they take this home and study all these publications. You as an Air Force pilot are responsible for knowing all of this. And Ben, to this day, I laugh about it because I loaded that, like a diligent student, I loaded that CD up and I opened it. And I went through every PDF and I totaled up the pages. It was over 16,000 pages of rules and regulations, not just...
We need to have a discussion on this topic, too. I'm writing this one down as well.
Well, because it was every single civilian regulation.
It's not physically possible for you to do what they ask you to do. It's one of the special kinds of things. There's a lot of things that tell you need to know this, and they mean it. And then there's some stuff like that where they tell you need to know this, and what they mean is you need to pencil whip this.
And I was of an age where I was able to identify the difference. And... yeah. When I saw 16,000 documents, I said, oh, when they said you need to know this, what they meant was when you screw up, these are the documents we're going to use to justify kicking you out.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing. None of that made...
We're realistic about this.
But none of it made any difference. None of it made a damn bit of difference unless something went wrong. In which case, they would pull every single quotation of what you did wrong out of that book.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter the defense of that is how we do, that is how everybody does it every single day does not hold up.
Right. I get it.
So anyway.
We have a full discussion about this. Okay, so eventually you got through all the training. You're qualified to fly RQ-45A or whatever it is.
That was the time when we started thinking about, all right, where are we going to go next? And there's only two places we discovered. There's ACC, Air Combat Command, had a Predator program. And there was AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command. And we didn't know the difference. Oh, Special Operations sounds cool, but I mean, ACC does all the real work. So we had, at the time, the squadron commander for the AFSOC squadron came down and he gave this sales pitch like we are we're the bee's knees. We're the guys that everybody looks up to. We're the ones that get to wear sunglasses, and when we walk in a room, everybody else has to take theirs off, kind of thing. And he said it. He the way that he sold it made it seem like the AFSOC version was a little more elite. And of course, that appeals to my ego. And so, who do you think competed to be in the AFSOC squadron and then got selected? Of the dozen of us that made it through the training program, like 5 or 6 of us went to the special operations, and I was one of those terribly unlucky individuals. And that was the complete limiting factor of what the rest of my career was going to look like.
Got it.
Which was, not a terrible thing. Like, the locations they are what they are, right? Like, does it matter where you are so much as what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, you say that like it's a hypothetical, but yeah, it kind of does matter. There's this funny joke where there's a lot of terrible locations in the Air Force that are all competing with being the worst one, but then they also have things like lots of alcohol-related incidents and suicides and those kinds of things. And I think the one you went to is officially the worst base in the Air Force.
Let's save that discussion for the birth of my first child in that location versus the birth of my second child, which was like some kind of weird fairy tale dream in a good way.
All right. So you got assigned your first base. You're sent to your first operational unit. I assume you get there as kind of like, I don't know, like JD and Turk, your residents. You have a supervising doctor that knows how to do this, but you're just the noobs, and we're not going to actually let you do anything important because you're going to screw something up.
Right. It's just like when we rolled into the other training. It's like we rolled up and they go, okay, we're going to assume that you know how to fly this airplane. Now we're going to teach you how to fly it our way. And they had a whole nother, you weren't even allowed to fly missions until you went through their own specialized training pipeline for, and it is different enough. Like, there is one thing, like knowing how to do all the things and then knowing how to actually do the things when it matters. Like, they are very different. And the training, again, was very good. The instructors that they had were very knowledgeable and experienced. And that whole portion of it was very good. What after that, it turned into the day-to-day. Now it settled into, this is your job now.
So what was the average day like doing the job?
So
your mission is persistent ISR.
So persistent ISR, which means we flew in shifts. And so just the way that they had a waterfall schedule for sorties, doesn't matter where they are geographically, because we can be anywhere because it's all flown by satellite. So we had to be familiar with, different places and the rules and the processes and the procedures for flying in different theaters. And then every day is something different. So you show up, there's a schedule. You can see, all right, I'm doing this today. It is in this place doing this thing. And you've done it. This is the thing. When you're new, it's all exciting. After 6 months, you have been there and done that for every iteration of anything that you could possibly do. And it just turns into a grind. And it is 8 hours of butts in the seats, just making, honestly, the worst part of it was that you hear about this all the time, like the drone strikes and stuff on TV, that especially during the Obama administration back in the day, that was a big deal. You hear about these strikes oh man, the military's out there just raining death and destruction down on random people, and it's just happening all the time. What you don't realize is that every time one of those things fires, what you don't see is the literal thousands of hours of intelligence gathering that went around that moment.
Just watching somebody and making sure it's the right guy and figuring out his patterns and figuring out you're not going to hurt someone else and making sure that yeah.
So for the 0.01% of the time that was very exciting, it was 99.9% very, very mundane, boring things to do.
So there's a lot of kind of people around this. I assume there's the maintenance crew out in the field that's within, reach of wherever the range of this thing is. And then there's the guys that land it when it takes off and lands. But then over communication lines back somewhere in the desert in the U.S., there's a couple of operators. Now, I think there's you, the pilot, and then there's also a person that's operating the camera, enlisted equipment operator.
That's a sensor operator, we called him.
But if you're operating a Predator that's actually armed with a Hellfire missile, when you fire that thing, it has to be the pilot, right? It's you that does it.
Yes. So And that's one of the big things is why pilots are officers is because like there's no reason you can't train an enlisted person on how to fly an airplane. Like it's not that difficult, honestly. But the Air Force has made the conscious decision from the inception of the branch as a service is that if you are going to employ deadly force on that scale, because at the, if us, we've got our one little missile, but there are B-52 commanders that are dropping thousands of pounds of ordnance capable of leveling entire small towns. And they want the person that is the last decision maker in that chain. They want that person to be an officer. They made that decision. Like we want this person to understand the responsibility that they are accepting by employing these munitions on target. And they say that the pilot is the pilot in command, and they use that term all the time. The pilot in command. The buck stops there. They're ultimately responsible for their decisions. And you know what? If they are in the moment and they don't feel right or they make a decision, they say, you know what? No, I'm not. This is not right. I'm not going to do it. Then we're going to back them up because we weren't actually there. Guess what, Ben? That never happened. Like if you were told from on high, yea, verily do this, and you went back and said, sir, with all due respect, you're not in the situation and I don't feel comfortable with that. Guess what they can do because you're there in the same building as them? They can yank your butt out of that seat and replace you with somebody that's way more compliant than you are.
So I was just doing, since I'm getting ready for my deployment, I had to do some of my like ancillary training you have to do to prepare. And I was doing the law of war training, and there's actually a principle under the law of war. I can't remember the name of it, but basically it is that commanders will be judged based on the information available to them at the time, not what information is later revealed to be true.
Is that centralized command, decentralized execution?
Yeah, no, it has a name of it.
It doesn't matter.
I can't remember the name of it.
So here's the thing. This is starting to get to the heart and the crux of what really started to drive me nuts as I gained experience in the airframe, right? So again, pilots are very skilled at what they do, but they are trained to do only the thing that they're supposed to do. Through a normal pilot accession and training pipeline, a lieutenant spends the first 4 years of their career doing nothing but training and being responsible for their own education and themselves, right?
Right.
Then you and I were comm officers. In that same 4 years, like I remember walking into the job on day one, and I was introduced to the 8 people and the mission that I was directly responsible for.
From the first day you arrive on the job, you're already supervising airmen.
Right. So my favorite joke was that all the pilots, all the people that were there that were pilots, were very good at being pilots. And all the people that were there that were like me, the beta people, we were very good at understanding the long-term ramifications of our decisions because that's what we had to deal with. And this was wrapped up very well in a joke that really made my commander mad at me. We were on night shift, and I was in the office at the time. Like that night, I wasn't flying, but I was still there. And there was a couple of other pilots in the room that weren't flying at the same time. And it was probably 11 o'clock at night. And the squadron commander came around. He just happened to be there, and he's like, "Hey, anybody want the other half of this pizza?" Well, like poked in the door and like opened the pizza box. And I went, "No, thanks, sir. We've got group PT, physical training, in like half an hour, and I want to make sure I'm not on a full stomach." And the other 2 pilots were like, "Pizza, yeah!" And then I started laughing. The commander goes, "What's so funny?" And I say, "Well, this right here. This is the difference between support officers like me and pilots. Support officers think about, how their decisions now are going to impact them later on and what's going to happen next. And whereas the pilots they see pizza and they attack." He didn't like that because he was a pilot.
Didn't go over
that
very
did not
well.
go over very well at all. And so I'm talking around the bush about pilots and things. Like I said, pilots, they are trained to be pilots, and they're not trained to do like these bigger thought experiment things. And I was there for 6 months before they made me the flight commander of 80-something other pilots because they recognized that I knew what I was talking about, and I'd been in charge of people before and blah, 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 blah. But I was fired from that job 3 times. And all three times they kept having to bring me back as the flight commander because after a week or 2, they realized the guy that they tried to have replace me has no freaking idea on how to do the job that they told him to do.
So to our civilian listeners, getting fired in the military is not like getting fired at a civilian job. Getting fired at a civilian job means you don't work in there anymore. Getting fired in the military just means they move you to a different desk.
Yeah. Instead of sitting at the big desk in the middle of the room, I sat at a desk on the side of the room for a week, and then they moved me back.
All right. So day to day, I'm imagining most of the time you're just like you arrive for your shift, you go into this dark room and there's another guy, you kind of high five the guy, he hands off the controls of the aircraft that's already on orbit to you, and you take over, and it's just very workmanlike, like control room to say, hey Bob, hey Bill,
Well, yeah, it was very much like that, like the beginning of War Games with the guys switching in and out of the missile silo. At the beginning, it was very much like I wanted like a full half-hour briefing. I want to know every detail of everything that's going on. And by like 6 months in, it was like 3 sentences, and then I just knew everything about what they had done for the whole day because it's always the same.
Yeah.
There were days that I went in for my 8-hour shift, sitting down and babysitting this airplane, where I didn't touch the controls. I did absolutely nothing. Like it was set up by the pilot right before me.
That sounds
It
terrible.
all looked fine, and I didn't touch anything. And then the guy came in, and I told him, we're doing this. I have literally not touched anything. And then we switch out.
But of course, you're there with a whole lot of knowledge in case something goes wrong and you can take over.
Yes. And every morning, every briefing, we had instructor pilots that would give an emergency procedures briefing. Like they talked about it. Like we would put an emergency, like as the briefing at the beginning of the shift. Like we'd all come in as a flight, and then as the senior duty pilot, I would have to give the briefing. Like, here's what the weather's looking like. Here's what our missions look like today. Here's the emergency scenario. Say you are at this place and your engine fails. What do? And I point at somebody, and they have to stand up and they have to go through the whole thing on what they would do. Yeah. And then they get critiqued at the end of it by everybody else in the room. And it's like an open field discussion about just keeping us all sharp and thinking about these things.
This is not at all what people imagine when they think of drone pilots.
But at the same time, like in a real airplane, yes, you need to be sharp and like on the button. Like if your engine fails, there's a lot of stuff that you've got to do to save your life. So it's real easy to get complacent when you're flying a drone because your life's not on the line. Like if the worst happens, I'm still alive. But there's a lot more that can go wrong because you're not actually there. Not only do you have to worry about the airplane, but you've got to worry about every computer system between you and the airplane now.
Yeah, and I was involved in that sometimes in my career. They're like, okay, part of this circuit you're operating is a live circuit used for operating drones, so you need to understand, if you take it down for maintenance, what kind of impact that's going to have.
We had problems with, so we like some of the comm guys. This is another thing. Like I really had a lot to contribute to a lot of these conversations. After I got fired the 4th time, and my commander, he was absolutely done with me. He sent me.
You're reminding me of that movie 12 O'Clock High, that classic movie where there's the sergeant that works for the general, and every time he sees him, he demotes him a stripe.
Yeah, like that, except much higher stakes and very much more visceral and real. Like I don't want to talk.
Yeah.
I at one point, Ben, I was not flying that night, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go for a run. And I was doing my favorite route, which was through base housing at 2 in the morning because there was nobody there. And I was running on the dotted lines in the middle of the street because that's the best part of the street. There's no slope or anything. And I identified in my mind that I was having persistent homicidal thoughts about my commander, the guy that kept firing me, because of...
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to go into details, but there are things that commander can do to make your life a living hell that are well within his rights. And he did that for everybody in his squadron, for his own aggrandizement. He was constantly putting the best foot forward to his leadership for himself, and we were suffering actively daily for it.
You mentioned how, at the kind of the peak of the war on terror and the Obama administration, when the drones started getting a lot of attention in the press, like there was strikes every day, there was also a lot of talk in the press, because I'm sure that the press came around and was doing interviews with people like your boss and their units and stuff, and these kind of problems came out into the press. And I remember there being this public awareness that even though these drone pilots sit back in the States, they're also experiencing combat stress. I mean, did you feel like, did you get like PTSD or flashbacks or those kinds of things?
No. And I will tell you right now, all of the PTSD that I had and all the PTSD that any of the people that I know in that squadron at the time had was not because of the operations we were conducting, but because of the environment we were conducting them in. Because of...
But here's my question from you, because you've told me about this before for you. Was it like that? Because, I mean, you give leeway when you're imagining like Platoon or Vietnam, where you're like in the trenches and there's fire raining down on you and the commanders are yelling at you, and you expect the commander to act like a jerk and give abrupt orders and treat everybody like trash. Now, you take all that same like ops tempo and demand of people, and you displace it into the States, and it feels a bit incongruent. Like, why should a commander need to act like that? But maybe he still kind of does.
Well, here's the thing. Like, you're talking about your deployment. You're going to deploy, or people deploy. I deployed with the Army in Afghanistan for 6 months, and we got shot at. And like, I went on convoys where I had to wear armor and have my weapon drawn to fire. And
right.
I have much more pleasant memories from that experience than I do for the time that I was in flying these drones.
But that's exactly what they were talking about in the press, about all the stress on the drone pilots.
The problem is, while you're deployed, it is for a certain length of time. The Air Force is really good about only sending somebody for 6 months because they know that there's a drop-off in productivity and mental health after 6 months. The drones, it was 365, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And like we flew weekends, we flew night shift, we rotated every month. And like, I didn't have a problem rotating from, a shift that started at 3 p.m. and went till midnight. Switching the next, over the course of a weekend, switching to midnight to 8 a.m. shift for the next month. Like, I had no problem doing that, but there were people that had serious sleep problems and like just to the point where it was causing noted mental illness in the squadron. And
now, don't you have the usual kind of like doctors that are evaluating you and saying, no, you can't go on mission because you haven't gotten enough sleep or whatever?
Here's the problem with that. Those are flight docs, and that's a whole nother level of physical preparedness that you have to go through. But you have to self-identify. They don't come through the squadron and like do the flashlight test in your eyes and then say this person's good, this person's not. And our manning was so thin at the time that there was multiple times where I would have to turn down people's leave because, sorry, we just don't have the availability.
See, I'm imagining, just having no knowledge of what's actually happening, that the conflict's happening over, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the drones start coming on and producing persistent ISR, and it's such a valuable commodity that every commander wants it, and they're all clamoring for it. And there's this huge food fight of who can get it, and so the appetite is endless. Like, the more you can produce, the more people want it, and it's just nonstop. So that you can never satiate the ground commanders.
So now, couple that. So the idea that, yes, you're absolutely right. There was an insatiable appetite. We cannot get enough of this capability. Like, the ground troops loved it, ate it up. They wanted all that they could get. Couple that with the Air Force trying desperately to justify its portion of the budgeting pie. With the last and the most problematic portion of that is my commander at the time very much knew the political environment that he existed in. And he started writing checks that were a little bit beyond the scope and the capability of his unit to cash. And he was pushing us to the absolute brink.
Sure.
And
it's what all commanders do.
This is different because I know.
You tell your boss you can do more than...
I know what you're saying, Ben, and I did the same thing when I was in the comm squadron. The difference is when I started telling him like that we have hard stops, like you are pushing us too hard. Like when I had an airman approach me and start talking about how he was becoming suicidal, and I took him to mental health that day to make sure that he was taken care of, that he wouldn't commit.
Like they tell you to do. Like they've trained you to do your entire career every single year.
Never leave this guy. If they start exhibiting
don't
these
leave him alone,
signs,
take it serious, have someone with him, get him help. Yes.
I took him to all right, so we had both just come off of a night shift. We had worked 8 straight hours. It was 8 in.the. It was like a Saturday in the real world. And I took him to mental health to get the help that he needed. And we were there for another 4 hours. And then he came back. We came back to the squadron. I handed him off to the first sergeant, and then was immediately called to the carpet by my commander, who chewed me up one side and down the other for how dare I take these.
You should have gone straight to the IG. I can't believe
I did. Then I went to IG. I went to Stan Eval. I went to everyone.
Like that should have been a congressional inquiry. That is egregious. So for him to give you punitive reprisal for following the suicide prevention. Oh my gosh. How does he even still have a career?
All right. So this all actually ties back in because like I that point I stopped being a good officer and I started being a person, and we had a screaming match at each other in his office.
I've done that once in my career.
It was fun. I enjoyed it. But here's the thing. Remember when I said I was running in the base and I had persistent homicidal thoughts for this guy?
Yeah.
That day, when I recognize that in myself, because again, that's training. Like if you see these signs, like I called
go ask for
I
help.
called mental health and like, hey, I'm having persistent homicidal thoughts.
Wait, let me tell you, they put you on hold and asked you if you can come in next month.
Ben, why are you joking about what happened in my real life? They told me their next available appointment was more than 30 days away. And I told them, okay, well, I guess I'll call you back when I have the gun in my hand. And then I hung up on them. But this is the funny thing. Then my airman did this whole thing, and then I got chewed out by my commander and was screaming at him in his office. He sent me for a command-directed mental health evaluation that week, and that was 5 days before my appointment would have been if I had made the appointment.
Wow.
Anyway, that's when I got for real fired from that job.
All right. So let's go down one last kind of dense, heavy trail, and then I want to lighten it up a little bit. Did you ever kill anyone? Can you say?
It's better to say, was I directly responsible for the death of other people?
Okay.
Did I directly kill anybody? I don't have any confirmed kills. I have unconfirmed kills. I have 11 unconfirmed kills to my name.
Wow.
But this is the thing. Like I wasn't like it was always a situation where I was directing somebody else's munitions typically, and then there was.
I see.
And there was. Oh,
I got it. You were providing eyes in the sky for someone else shooting artillery or something.
Right, and then yeah, basically. So I do get on my records and everything. I'm attributed those. They were never confirmed because there's always. Here's the thing we always like to joke about. We were special operations, right? Like no, special operations doesn't leave the base unless they have 15 airplanes, 10 helicopters, and a whole convoy of death and destruction following them. And so if they're calling for my weapons, like it's either a really, really bad situation or everybody else is out of ammo.
But that's not what people imagine when they think of drones. They think of this swarm of airplanes in the sky with 10 missiles on every wing. They don't realize it's just like one lone predator with a single Hellfire missile that can barely kill one guy.
Oh, and yeah, we're not even going to talk about that. But so anyway, usually when in those situations where I was a part of the weapons employment, it was like I was the last guy on the dog pile, basically. So.
Yeah.
A lot of unconfirmed kills.
Did you ever name your airplanes?
No. So we barely went on the remote guys. We barely registered which plane we were flying, like physically, like which physical plane.
It was impersonal. You didn't like name them and have nose cone art or anything like that.
No, nothing like that. But the guys that went downrange. So, like you said, there are people that have to be physically there with the airplane to do like the maintenance and the stuff with it. The guys that went to do that, they had a much more direct connection with like the physical planes and the different tail numbers and stuff. So those guys had a little more involved. They were standing up the program to let us semi-pilots go do that portion of it, like right as I was getting out.
All right, let's kind of wrap it up.
Well, let me put a bow on this whole thing.
Sure.
I spent 3 years doing drone operations for the Air Force because I was dissatisfied with my role. And I transitioned to that thinking that being closer to the fight would make me a more valued asset or I would be in a better environment or something, having misidentified what my problems with the bureaucracy and the organization were. What I found was a severely dishearteningly corrosive, overworked, undermanned.
Yeah, that really backfired.
Just really, really terrible.
Not only did you not escape it, you like went to the where it was the most distilled and concentrated.
So I have two types of stress streams in my life still to this day. One of those is the generic Air Force Academy stress streams, typically revolving around I can't remember where my class is and I can't get there, or I'm having a test and I've never been in this class before, kind of thing. And the other is I'm back flying UAVs. And it was just, and again, it wasn't anything to do with the weapons employment or the missions that we did. Like I had no problems with any of that. I was very good at that part of it. It was the leadership and just the bad decisions and the toxicity of the people that were involved in that. That just, it was really bad. And I felt really, really sorry for all the people that I was leaving behind. At the same time, I made the best decision I could for my family, and honestly, I'm still I apologized to Nicole on a consistent basis because she had to make active decisions to follow me for us to stay together as a couple, to come to the base that she did. And then when I found this environment and just wanted nothing more than to get out, like that, she also made the decision, and we talked about through it a lot, to also get out of the military. And I feel very bad for making this stupid decision when I was a younger man, not identifying the problems I had in my life and having her make this monumental change in her life for me. Like, I feel like I owe her so much for accepting that level of change because I made a bad decision, you know?
That's good, man. She's a keeper.
She is a keeper. 5'2", physical and emotional abuse constantly.
6 pounds.
Sick, soaking wet 6 pounds. And I love every inch of that tiny woman.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you came away from that experience with a good wife. What else? Did you learn anything valuable from it? Do you feel like it improved your character?
So yes, I feel like that was the first time in my life that I really grew up. Before that point, I was running on like sheer competence and narcissism was just like my buzzwords. I came out of that.
I remember feeling like that sometimes.
I was indestructible.
Like, you know, when I got to college, like high school was easy.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
When I got to college, I'm like, man, this is kind of hard.
That's the thing. Like, I felt like up until that point, I coasted through like everything that I did and excelled. Came out at the top of the pie, right? And coming out of that, I was very humbled because it did not matter what my capacity was. It didn't matter how smart I thought I was or how skilled I thought I was. I was still severely lacking in a number of ways personally that limited my options, burned a lot of bridges, and admittedly contributed to some of the situations that I found myself in.
Dude, that's profound.
Was there better ways that I could have addressed my issues with my commander that wouldn't have made him an enemy and an antagonist in this scenario? Maybe, but I will never know that. So all I can do is try to be a more humble person than I've been in the past and try to identify when I'm letting my need for justice and my righteous indignation get the better of me.
That's a very mature thing you just said.
Ben, you say like 6 mature things a minute on this podcast. I think I'm allowed to get one in by episode 27.
I make bad decisions too. Yeah, you good job. You did it. America owes you a debt of gratitude for your role in the global war on terror, both as a support troop, making sure that the telephones and computers of the Air Force are working, and as a remotely piloted aircraft pilot, making sure that we provide persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to the warfighter on the ground.
I've got so many good other like little anecdotal stories about how like little things that pilots don't get that support guys do. Just little things. Like, I could go on that for hours. And we should have little segments like that. Could be my segment. Like, this was a stupid thing that happened to me in the Air Force.
There was about 3 ideas we stumbled through there that I think we need to revisit at some point. But for now, I think we can leave this one behind.
Yes. Everybody, if you have questions about what it's like to be a drone pilot in the Air Force, don't ask. I will not answer them because I do not want to go to federal prison for answering questions on a podcast.
Well, that leads to something I do want to bring up, and that is we've never really done what I would call like a Q&A kind of show, and I've heard ones to great success, and I know we've got some listeners out there that, how many listeners do we have, Josh?
Oh, Ben, we have at least 1.7 million listeners as of today.
One of our listeners told me they love how every time you talk about how many listeners you have, 1, it's severely underestimated, and 2, you never give the same answer twice.
Well, because, Ben, this podcast is going to live forever on the internet. Who knows? Maybe we're, like we talked about before, we might be the Bill and Ted of podcasts. Bill and Ted. We could unite the whole world. And so me saying our actual number of listeners could be severely dating ourselves in the future. Who knows?
So here's your challenge, listeners, and I think I'm going to do this for 2 sessions, and we'll put it out on Facebook and on the subreddit, is your questions. I want to do an episode where we take listener questions. What do you want to know? What questions you got about, I don't know, how to have a really clean pool or how to deliver a baby or, anything you want to know. We'll talk about it. No, nothing is off limits.
Yes.
So I'll make that up on the social medias and we'll start gathering listener questions for a Q&A episode.
And for all of our Latter-day Saints listeners, like I will answer every iteration of what's wrong with you? How dare you? What's your problem? I'm 100% open to those questions.
Yeah. All right. Good. Okay. Yeah. So, like I said, we love hearing from our audience. If you want to participate in the show, we appreciate those of you that, as we put a lot of effort into making sure that there's good content for you out there. So every episode, we've got show notes with links to the things we talked about during the show. I always put together a pile of at least 10 or so graphics that go along with every show. So if you've been listening for a while and you haven't looked at them, do yourself a favor, go to the Bad at Magic Facebook page and go to the photo albums. And for every single episode, there's an album with images of the things we talked about. That might be a pleasant surprise for you. So participate on Facebook, on Reddit. You can go to our website. You can listen on your favorite podcast player. And if you appreciate what we do, you can go to patreon.com/badatmagic and become a patron of the show.
If you don't feel like giving us anything more than that, recommend us to a friend. If you enjoy what we do, maybe somebody else will too.